Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Jon, standing on the deck as the ship pulled into the docks, Jon finally felt the stirring. There was something special about coming back to the north. While Casterly Rock in the west had been more of a home to him than Winterfell when he really thought about it, he was of the north, and it was good to be back. He could see from looking around him that the other northerners felt the same. Small Jon was almost jumping up and down in joy, though whether that was at the thoughts of being back in the north or of northern ale, he couldn't tell. Daisy, Ser Jorah, and Leness too looked happy to see northern soil once again. Leness had surprised Loras with how much she'd taken to the north, but Jon had sensed there was far more to the lady than Loras had anticipated. It seems the ladies of the Reach were built of sterner stuff. Looking down to his belt where the favor was now tied, Jon smiled. He had known that to be true ever since the tourney at Lannisport. Ser Wendell was smiling broadly as he stood looking at the dock, and Jon did his best to see who it was he was looking at. There was definitely people waiting to meet the ship, and it took him only a few moments to recognize Ser Wylis. Beside him there were a number of guards and what seemed at first glance to be two young girls. Ser Wylis's daughters, perhaps, he thought to himself. To his own left was certainly the most excited of all the travelers to be back in the north, though. Ever since they'd entered the Bight, Ghost had been more eager than ever to stay up on the deck. Last night, despite Jaime's protests, Jon had slept on deck with the wolf. He had found a quiet corner out of the wind and brought a blanket that was added to by the large white wolf curled on top of him. Loras had offered to sleep on deck also, but seeing his friend shiver in the cold, Jon had insisted he went back below deck. When he finally went to sleep, he had dreamt of who he believed to be his mother, a young beautiful girl, riding a black horse like she was born to do so. Her hair flowing in the wind and her laugh echoing, just thinking of her, brought a smile to his face. "Looks like someone's happy. Be home," Loras said as he walked up behind him. Don't you feel the same when you arrive back in the Reach?" Loras's own smile was answer enough. "How long will we be staying here?" "I don't know, a few days at least. We have to buy horses and carts, supplies for the night's watch, and a cloak for a very cold boy from the Reach." Jon jabbed, and Loras pushed him. "Have you ever been here before?" Loras asked. "No, until Lord Jaime hadn't been anywhere. My brother came a year before I left. But I was," Jon said, and the sound of Jaime's footsteps allowed him to leave the sentence unfinished. "I think it's time we got the horses ready, Jon. I'm sure Winter will be delighted to stretch her legs properly." "Aye," Jon said, and took a last look at the docks. He could see the wolf's den and smirked as Ghost rested his head on the side of the ship, looking on longingly as the docks grew ever closer. It took them less than an hour to dock. In that time, Jon had saddled both Winter and Honor. He led them both from the hold and out onto the deck and down the gangplank where Soradis was thankfully finished. The introductions. Walking forward to Lord Yachi, he handed in the reins and bid Soradis hello. He was thankful that horses had been provided for everyone. Though not a long journey to the seat of House Manderly, he would rather ride it than walk it, and had horses not been provided, then he would not have ridden without Loras. "She's a fine animal, Jon," Ser Wylis said as he mounted Winter. "Aye, Sir Zor, Lord Loras' brother breeds both hounds and horses, isn't that right, Loras?" "Aye, Jon, it is. Wylis has garnered a great reputation for both," Loras said proudly. "Well, looking at Jon's mare here, I'd say it was well deserved." Ser Wylis smiled before adding, "I heard about the joust, Jon. Really, it's been spoken of here," Jon said, surprised not by the fact it was being talked about, but that it had already managed to make it north. "Hey, Wendell mentioned it in his raven to inform us of your visit." "I had no choice, sir. He insulted my mother, and by doing so, my father," Jon said, determinedly. "You did right, lad. I'd not accept an insult to my family, either." "Wish I could have seen him fall, though," Wendell said. "It was a sight to behold. Just thinking about it had my father laughing for days," Ser Wylis said, with a laugh. They rode onwards, laughing and japing. Behind them came the carriages carrying Lady Leness and Ser Wylis's daughters. Lord Jaime, Ser Jorah, Daisy, and the Small Jon were grouped together. Yasumi laughing loudly at Daisy's ribbing of Small Jon ahead of him. Ser Wendell and the Corstark seemed deep in conversation. Passing through a fishfoot yard and its fountain, which Loras found fascinating. They entered through the seal gate and continued on to Castle Stair, each step taking them closer to the new castle itself. White Harbor was to Jon's mind an impressive city. Not as large as Lannisport, but he found it far more pretty to look at, the whitened walls, the marble mermaids in their bowls which Sor Wireless informed them were filled with whale oil which was lit at night. When they came to the new castle itself, even James seemed impressed when Jon turned to look at him. The Wolf's Den was built by the first men and had been gifted to the Manderlys when they were exiled from the Reach. But Newcastle was the home they built for themselves, and it was a reminder of their time there. Far more elaborate than most of the typical functional castles in the north, Jon felt a welcoming sight. "I'll have some guards take your horse to the stables." "Jon," Sir Wireless said, motioning to the standing guards. "I had better do it myself, Sir Honor, too. I'm still a squire after all," Jon said with a smile. "All right, lad. I'll send some guards with you anyway. When you're done, they'll take you to the merman's court. Come, Lord Lors, I'm sure my father will be pleased to meet a lad from the Reach." Sir Wireless said, a smirk on his face. Lorzier looked at him, and Jon just nodded. Dismounting Winter, he walked her over to Honor and took the other horse by the reins. Sir Wendell had already led Lord Yane to the castle, so he was left alone. But for the guards in the courtyard, it was at that point that Ghost decided to reappear. The wolf having practically jumped from the ship when they docked. Looking at him now, Jon could see he'd soon be hearing tales of the trouble he caused. The white wolf's fur on his face was matted by what to Jon looked a combination of pastry and butter. Jon watched amusedly as his wolf tried in vain to lick it clear, his tongue not managing to reach it all. Jon couldn't help but laugh at the sight. Though this was quickly stopped when the sounds of alarm reached his ears. He could hear the footsteps of the guards, and one look at Ghost saw his back arched and primed. "There's the beast," a voice shouted. "To arms," shouted another. "Relax, there's no need to worry." Jon said his words, which, though not having the affect on himself, at least seemed to calm tensions a little. "Ghost, sit," he said loudly, his wolf looking at him as if to say, "Why are you speaking?" Thankfully, though, he got the message. The white wolf sat and played nice. Jon looked on as the guards lowered their weapons, and he breathed a huge sigh of relief. He walked over to Ghost and rubbed his head. Before turning to the guard who looked to be in charge, looking at him, he could see the resemblance to the Manderlys. He searched his mind for memories of his lessons, before remembering the man's name. "Forgive me, Sir Marlon, I should have kept better control of him." Jon said apologetically, "Aye, you should, lad. What is that thing?" "It's a direwolf, sir. His name is Ghost." Jon said, almost as affronted as Ghost by him being called a thing. "A direwolf," Sir Marlon said, incredulously. "Aye, sir. My name is Jon Snow. He's my companion." Jon said and almost laughed as Ghost gave him a look. "Aye, we heard tale you had a wolf. Jon Snow, though no one dared think he was that large. He's harmless mainly. I'll keep a better watch on him." "See that you do. I'm to escort you to the merman's court. Normally I'd tell you to leave the wolf behind, but perhaps it's better to bring it with us," Sir Marlon said, shaking his head. Jon nodded to Ghost, and the wolf jumped to his feet. Following him as he walked past a young boy and girl, looking at him with great interest, he watched as Ghost walked over to them both, sniffing the boy and licking the girl's hand, making her laugh. He turned to say something to them, but both walked away, and so after a moment he followed Sir Marlon, though something in the back of his mind told him he should be following them instead. Jaime, White Harbor was a pleasant delight, he found. He had enjoyed riding, though its bright streets. It was a proper city, something he had not found on his last visit north. Now walking through the castle itself, he couldn't help but smirk at the decorations that lined the way. Mermaids and mermen were everywhere. What was it, he wondered, that made houses wish to display their cigarilles so extensively? His father had his lions, the Baratheons their stags. The Starks had their wolves, while the Targaryen dragon was everywhere. As he looked at yet another merman holding a trident, he began to laugh. At least they were far better than trout. "What's so funny?" Daisy said from beside him. "Nothing. Just thinking how much better a merman is than a fish." The laugh he got from her in response to his jape almost took his breath away. It made her beautiful in a way he had seen very few women look before. His sister was a beauty, though, that was only skin deep. Queen Rhaegar was almost otherworldly, as were most of the Targaryens given their portraits. At Harrenhal he'd seen Lyanna Stark briefly, and there was a certain life about her, a spirit that he found incredibly attractive and made him understand why Rhaegar fell for her. He'd also seen Ashara Dayne, and his mentor's sister was worthy of song, her purple eyes and dark skin making her uniquely beautiful. But ever since seeing Daisy swing a mace, seeing the woman slip effortlessly into the role of a lady, Jaime believed he'd never seen a woman as beautiful as she. Sometimes he'd have to stop himself from staring at her, and when he'd find her looking at him, he'd feel his heart beat rise and find himself becoming easily flustered. Shaking his head to clear it of such thoughts, he found himself entering the merman's court itself. Its floors and walls decorated not just with the mermen and women from earlier, but with all manner of sea creature. Around him, sitting at tables, were men and women, ladies and soldiers, some being one and the same, he found to his surprise. He looked to Daisy, who was smiling at the two young women sitting to his left. Up front, sitting on a raised chair, was someone who could only be Lord Manderly. "Lord Yang, I bid you welcome to White Harbor," Wyman said, a large smile on his face. "It is an honor to be here, Lord Wyman," Jaime said with a small nod. "Sir Jorah, Lady Leness, it seems your family sent visitors once they heard you'd be arriving so soon," Wyman said, motioning to the two women. "Aye, 'tis good to see them, Lord Wyman." Jorah said, smiling. "This lad, he's not Jon Snow?" Wyman said, a confused look on his face as he looked at Loras. "No, my lord, may I present Lord Loras Tyrell, my squire," Jaime said, as Loras took a step forward and bowed. "Welcome to White Harbor, Lord Tyrell," Wyman said, a little glint in his eyes. "I thank you, my lord," Loras replied. "Is young Jon not part of your party, Lord Jaime?" "He is my lord, but he's putting the horses away, as is a squire's duty." Jaime said and was pleased to see the almost proud nod the lord gave him when he spoke. "Tonight, my lord, we shall feast you. For now, though I shall have my men show you to your quarters, should you need anything at all, feel free to ask." "I thank you, my lord," Jaime said, and turned to leave just as Ghost stormed into the room, followed by an exasperated Jon. "Come back here. No go stop," Jon said. Yaxmir heard the gasps and watched on in amusement. The wolf had made his way to the nearest table, almost knocking the man who was sitting there to the ground in his haste to eat the pie which had just been placed there. Ghost's front two paws were resting on the table, his snout buried in the pie, and the sounds of pastry being torn into resonated along with the gasps and the boisterous laughter from Lord Wyman. "Get down from there. This instant," Jon said, his hands trying to drag Ghost away to no avail. Finally, when the pie was finished, Ghost allowed himself to be pulled away from the table before looking to Jon with his head lowered and his tongue lolling out. "Really? Now you want me to give you water after that?" Jon said before the wolf rubbed his head against his hand. When Jon turned to see everyone in the room looking at him, Jaime almost laughed at the embarrassed look on his face. Lord Wyman, though, was laughing loudly. "My lords and ladies, I give you Jon Snow and Ghost the direwolf," Lord Wyman said as if he presented a mummer's show. Jaime looked to Jon, who shrugged before joining in as those around the room began to laugh. A servant nervously approached Jon and handed him a large bowl of water before she quickly moved away. He laughed even louder at the noise of the water being lapped by the clearly thirsty wolf before Jon turned to look at Lord Wyman. "It seems you use too much salt, my lord," Jon said, and the large lord almost burst, he laughed so much. "I've been telling them that for years. Come forward, young Jon. Let me take a look at the boy who's done so much for my house." Jaime watched as Jon moved towards the front of the hall, Ghost walking alongside him, his thirst obviously satiated. As he reached Lord Wyman's seat, Jaime was surprised to see the large lord get to his feet and walk to Jon. Before he embraced him like a long-lost son, catching both Jon and the rest of the hall by surprise. He stood in front of Jon, his eyes roaming his face before he nodded and smiled. All the while, Jaime looked on nervously. "You have the look of your father Jon, though I dare say Ned was never so pretty," Wyman said to last from the room. "Perhaps I take after my mother more, my lord," Jon said, and Jaime had to stifle a laugh. "Indeed, she must have been a pretty lass. Come, Jon, sit. I know you wish to get to your rooms, but I'd like to speak to you if I may." "Of course, my lord, I'd be honored," Jon said. Jaime thought about staying, but looking to Jon, he saw him nod. He'd be fine, and so he. Lords and their guards made their way to their rooms. Daisy stayed behind, with whom Jaime had since learned were her sisters. While the small Jon and the Karstarks seemed more eager to partake in the northern ale than anything else, so Jaime and Loras walked down a long corridor and were brought to a very elaborate set of rooms. "My lord, this is your room. Lord Loras is down the hall, and there are a couple of rooms for your guards. The rest are welcome to billets in the barracks," the small slender man said. "I think my captain can find them rooms. At a nearby tavern, if you could recommend one. I'd like to treat my men while we're on land." "Of course, my lord. I shall be happy to help." "Where's Jon's room?" "Jon, my lord." "I, Jon Snow, my squire," Jaime said. If they'd placed his king in inferior rooms, Jaime would not be happy. "Ah, my apologies, my lord. Lord Wyman has insisted Jon be given a room in the family wing." Yavze smiled. Now that was not what he expected. Was it because he was his liege's son, or because of what he'd done for them, or was the crafty old lord up to something? Whatever it was, he would find out soon enough. For once, Loras was missing Jane's fussing. He had haphazardly packed his things and couldn't find one of the warmer undershirts he had bought in Gulltown. They had been a lifesaver on the trip through the Bight, and now, here in White Harbor, he knew he needed them. The problem was he couldn't find them. He knew they were here, but where he couldn't say. When he heard he knock at the door, he groaned. It couldn't be time yet. Surely, he opened it to find Jon dressed already, and with a large smirk on his face. "Really, Loras, you must do better," Jon said in a passable impression of Jaime. "Get in here, you fool." Loras had his uncovered chest feeling even colder with the door open. "Looking for these?" Jon said, holding up the undershirts. "Wait, how did you? Did you hide these on me?" he said, miffed. "No, stupid, somebody put them in the wrong trunk. Now who do I know who's empty-headed enough to do such a thing?" Jon japped. Loras couldn't help but laugh. The two chests did look the same. Jon's other chest was a much darker wood, but the one he kept his clothes in and Loras's were both bought by Jinna for them. He took the undershirt and quickly put it on, dressing himself rather fast once he'd done so. As he was checking his hair, he was again interrupted by a knock on the door. Thankfully, Jon answered, leaving him to his own devices. "There you are, Jon. You should have let me know where you'd be," a tall brown-haired girl said. "Indeed, sister. How very mean of him." A younger, small blonde said from beside her, a smirk on her face. "I'm sorry, my lady. It seemed my friend needed some help to look presentable." "Lord, yes. Are you ready yet?" Jon said, and Lord cringed both at the mocking in his friend's voice and the giggles from the two girls. "I'm ready," Lord said, walking to the door. "Oh, finally, Lady Winifred. Lady Walla, may I introduce Lord Loras Tyrell," Jon said with a bow. "Lord Tyrell, may I present Lady Winifred and her sister Lady Wella Manderly, whom we have the honor of accompanying tonight." "My ladies," Lord Ziad said with a perfect bow. "Well, at least this one knows how to bow properly. Not like you, Jon." Wella said mischievously. "Lord Loras is far more refined than me, my lady, for I'm just a northern savage," Jon said, and both girls giggled. "Shall we?" Lady Winifred said, holding out her arm, which Jon took. "My lord," Lady Willa said, an even bigger smirk now on her face. "My lady," he replied as he took her arm. Jon and Winifred spoke in front of him, almost effortlessly, and Walla beside him was an absolute chatterbox, switching subjects while giggling every few moments. Lord Years, though, felt decidedly uncomfortable when they reached the rest of the party, all of them standing waiting to enter the room. Ahead of him, Sir Wella stood with a woman who was clearly the mother of the two girls he and Jon accompanied. Lord Jaime stood with Lady Daisy, while Sir Jair and his wife stood behind them. There were some other men Loras didn't recognize, including a small man who looked at Jon intently. After a few moments, the music played up, and they began to walk forward. Before stopping at the entrance to the merman's court, a herald quickly entered and began to announce them. "Lord Wyman Manderly, the Lord of White Harbor, the Warden of the White Knife, the Shield of the Faith, Defender of the Dispossessed, Lord Marshal of the Mander and Knight of the Order of the Green Hand. Lord Jaime Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of the West, Friend of the North." Loras looked to Jon, who was staring at a confused-looking Jaime. Apparently, he didn't expect the last bit either, only to quickly look back as Lady Daisy was introduced. "Sir Wyse Manderly, heir to White Harbor, and Lady Lyanna Woolfield. Sir Jorah Mormont, Lord of Bear Island, and Lady Lynese Mormont, Lord Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch." At this, Jon's head snapped around and stared at the small man, who gave him a nod and a smile. Loras watched as the two looked at each other for a few moments, Lord Jaime looking at them both also. Before too long, they began walking in, Jon almost needing to be dragged by Lady Winifred. The hall was decked out even more extravagantly than before. Lighted torches accompanied by bowls of fiery liquid creating shadows on the wall. Jaime, Lady Daisy, and the others walked to the high table. He and Jon were led to a table right at the front, which seemed to contain more of the younger people of White Harbor. He saw Jon look intently at a young boy and girl who were already sitting down. The boy had a serious look on his face, and his green eyes were sparkling as they looked at Jon. The girl, who was obviously his sister, was older but shared the same brown hair and green eyes the boy did. "Raiders, yeah, Josian," Willa said from beside him when he pulled her chair for her to sit. "Walla," the girl said with a smile. The boy sat silently looking at Jon. "Have you met Lord Reed's children before, Jon?" Winafred asked. "No, my lady, I haven't, though we almost met earlier in the courtyard." "Aye, we would have stayed had we been able to, but it seemed you were a bit busy with your wolf," the girl said with a smirk. "Where is Ghost anyway?" Lors asked. "He's asleep in Jon's room," the boy said, his voice sounding far older than it should from such a young boy. "How did you know that?" Jon asked suspiciously. "Just a guess, Jon. My name is Josian. My sister Meera and I had been looking forward to meeting you for a long time." "Really? Why?" Jon asked, and Loras felt almost as uncomfortable, as Lady Winafred now seemed to be sitting beside his friend. "Our father spoke of you often, Jon, you and your white wolf," Meera said with a smile, and Loras was pleased to see Jon relax some. "I must thank him. He and my uncle, along with Lord Manderly, are the reason I have Ghost." "I'm sure father will be most pleased to speak with you, Jon," Josian said. "Come on, this is a feast. Let's have some fun," Rolly said from beside him, and Loras laughed, feeling the tension dissipate. Jon just sat looking at the Reed boy, an indecipherable look on his friend's face. It seemed every time the boy spoke, Jon's heckles were raised. Lady Winifred said something to him, though, which made him laugh. But Loras couldn't help but look at the small green-eyed boy. While around him, even his sister joined in the japing, he instead just stared constantly at Jon. "Daisy! By the gods, the Manderlys could throw a feast." How many courses did it take before someone was full? Looking down the table at Lord Wyman, she guessed maybe just a few more. Lord Jaime had been extra attentive tonight. He had smiled at her dress and complimented her more than once. Perhaps she may even get a dance from the man later on. She thought as she looked down at her sisters who were sitting near the front. Having Jory and Lyra here was a surprise, and seeing them sitting with Torrhen and Harrion and the small Jon almost made her wish she was at that table. But the man beside her made her glad she was sitting where she was. Her sisters had teased her when they saw the golden-haired Jaime Lannister, both saying he was even prettier than her. When they had seen how interested she really was, though, both had stopped their ribbing and had instead been very supportive. So much so that the confidence she'd not felt since being around the man had returned and given his attentiveness tonight. She felt that perhaps something may happen between them. Unfortunately, it was then that fate decided to play its part. To her left, Leness had barely touched her food all evening. When she felt her hand being grabbed by her cousin's wife, she knew something was wrong. She almost panicked at the look on her face when she turned to her. "Are you all right, Leness? Can you take me to the privy, Daisy, quickly?" Come on." The two women stood up and quickly made the way to the nearest privy. Though not being used to the keep, instead quickly came upon an empty garderobe. Inside they were happy to find a privy, and Leness quickly went inside. Daisy turned to give her privacy, but was almost dragged into the room with her. Within seconds it started. Leness began to vomit, even though she hadn't had much to eat. All of it came out of her. For the next hour or so, Daisy stood with her, holding her hand and finding a damp cloth to wipe her face. They talked about some non-important things to pass the time, while outside she heard the music play and knew they were dancing, despite longing to go back into the hall, though she wouldn't leave her sister by choice. Leness and she had become very close, probably closer than she was with her own sisters, none of whom really cared about the more ladylike pursuits. With Leness, she had someone who she could talk to of such things, share a love of fine dresses and embroidery, while also not be judged when she was dressed in her armor. "How are you feeling?" "I'm better, I think. Is there any water?" Leness answered. I'll get some." She moved and grabbed a jug filled with water from the nearby table. Filling a cup, she handed it to her, watching as she swallowed, and asked for another. When she was finally satisfied, the two of them sat down on the chairs, Daisy holding Leness's hand in hers. "When was your last moon blood?" she asked. "I don't know, a couple of moons." "No 3 moons ago, you don't think?" I do. You're with child Leness," Daisy said, and watched as the smile beamed on her friend's face. "I should see a maester, but not here. Perhaps at Castle Black." "Are you sure, Leness? Would it not be best to know for certain?" "No, I want to meet your uncle, Jer's father. He couldn't come to the wedding, so we can go to him. Besides, if Jer knows, he'll make us go back to Bear Island." You're right. Just well be careful, all right." "I will, thanks Daisy for being here." "Of course," she said, hugging Leness. By the time they made it back to the hall, the dancing was mainly over. Amy was talking to Jon in the corner. though he smiled at her when he saw her enter, which made her heart flutter. She walked with Leness back to the table. Jorah looked concernedly at his wife, who just smiled and nodded at him before taking her seat. Jaime came over a few minutes later while Jon walked back to his table. "Lady Daisy, Lady Leness, I trust all is well," Jaime asked, looking from her to Leness. It's fine, Lord Jaime, though it seems I missed the dancing," she said, looking coyly at him. "Indeed, my lady, though I've no doubt our host will throw at least one more feast before we depart." "Of that you can be sure, my lord," Jorah said, clearly happier now that Leness seemed in better spirits. "So what did we miss?" Daisy asked as both Jaime and Jorah laughed. "What? Where to start? How about a clearly drunk Smalzion trying to dance while being hit by Jory? Or Loras basically being dragged around the floor by Walla? No, not enough. Then how about my other squire being the belle of the ball?" Jaime said, laughing loudly now. "Jon? What do you mean?" Leness asked, her interest piqued. "It seems your niece has been giving him lessons, my love, something which the young ladies appreciated," Jorah said, as he laughed. "I seems once the ladies saw a boy who could dance. Well, that was it. He practically ran to me as soon as the dancing was over with," Jaime said, and she looked to see a miserable-looking Jon Snow being teased by Loras. "Surely Loras had lessons too?" she asked. "Aye, but unlike Jon, his politeness didn't extend to dancing well. After stepping on Lady Wella's feet one too many times, he found his services no longer required," Jaime said. "Now I really hope we get another feast," Daisy said, smiling. "As do I, my lady," Jaime said, looking at her intently. Wyman, when he heard Lord Jaime and Jon Snow would be joining his son on his return home, he'd been delighted. He had long wished to meet the young man who had done so much for his family. The fact the boy was still doing things which benefited him, and also the North, was something Wyman found interesting. When Wendell arrived earlier without Jon with him, he had been a little disappointed. He was glad to meet Lord Jaime, though, and looked forward to properly taking the measure of the man. But it was Jon Snow he most wanted to see. Luckily, he didn't have to wait for long, and when he saw him, he was stunned. He had heard the boy was the perfect image of his father, and while Wyman could see the resemblance, the boy was far too pretty to be all Stark. Watching the lad with the wolf had been an experience in of itself, but as impressed as he was with the control the lad showed with the wolf, it was his attitude more than anything that Wyman reflected upon. To say the lad was confident would be an understatement. To see how far he'd come from that quiet boy he'd met years ago made Wyman thankful once more for Jaime Lannister. His time in the West had done wonders for the boy, which in turn had done wonders for he and the North. As he sat at the high table looking out on those feasting, he reflected upon their conversation earlier. "Well, young Jon, it's good to see you again after all these years." "You too, my lord, and may I thank you for delivering Ghost to me. It was very much welcomed." "Think nothing of it. You should thank Lord Reed too, should you ever get the chance to meet the man," Wyman said, laughing loudly. "I would be more than happy to, my lord. I heard what happened with the fish in King's Landing." "Jon, you did? I wasn't sure it would travel all the way here," the boy said softly. "Aye, that it did. You did the North proud, lad. Did your family proud," Wyman said, and watched as Jon gave him a surprised look. "You think so, my lord?" "Aye, I do. I heard how he acted. Wendell's Raven made it clear. You were standing up for your mother and father, if I read it right." "I was, my lord." He insulted them both, and refused to apologize. Jon said indignantly, "Well, you knocked him on his arse then, didn't you? Thought him not to mess with a wolf, didn't ya, lad?" Wyman said, and this time Jon laughed with him. "Do you think Lord Stark has heard, my lord?" "Aye, I reckon he has, Jon, but you were in the right. Don't let anyone tell you different, lad." "I won't, my lord," Jon said emphatically. "Good lad. Now go with Arlene to your rooms, lad. We'll speak later. White Harbor and its lord are most pleased to have you here," Wyman said with a smile, which Jon returned. As he looked down the table, he saw Howland, and that was a surprise that he still was processing. It had been almost 8 years since he'd seen his old friend, the man more content to stay in the neck than to ever leave. The last time Howland had he'd more than likely saved his life, so Wyman felt an obligation to the man that others in the North did not. He'd not have the Crannogmen spoken badly of in his presence because of it. But to see Howland leave the neck and arrive here at the same time Jon Snow did, well, that was far too convenient to be a coincidence. He had spoken to Howland only briefly to welcome him, but the mere fact he'd come would have been enough to raise Wyman's intrigue. The fact he'd also brought his children, well, that had Wyman scrambling. What was he doing here? Why now? What had this to do with Jon Snow? For he was certain it was the lad he'd come to see. If there was something afoot, he'd get to the bottom of it. If it could help Jon Snow in any way, then he'd be a part of it. He owed the lad, after all. When Wendell told him of the changes he'd negotiated to their deals, Wyman had been astonished. He'd been meaning to send Wylis to speak with Lord Tyrion about expanding more into Essos. But he'd put it off knowing it would limit their operations in Westeros, only to find that Jon had once again found a solution. What a solution it was, too. In one stroke, he just made the Mormonts probably the second richest family in the north, while also helping both the Umbers and Corstarks. You were saying this was Jon's idea, son. Aye, father, I am. Ser Jorah is overjoyed. And though the deal with the Umbers still needs the great Jon's approval, he'll be a fool to turn it down. As for Lord Rickard, well, the benefits are massive. The boy continues to amaze me, son. What was the joust like? Father, you should have seen it. You too, Wylis. I've not seen the like of it before. On the first tilt he got caught with a heavy shot. It should have unhorsed him, but it didn't. The second tilt, though, he lost his shield, father. Then almost fell from the horse. The effects of the first tilt clearly, but how he managed to win it, I know not. He caught the fish square and knocked him flat on his arse. Wendell said, and all three laughed. He's a good horseman, then? Wylis asked. Aye, I've not seen a better one. You never seen the Lady Lyanna ride, did you, son? No, father. The girl's a centaur, I'll tell you. No better horseman or woman in the north. A she-wolf would leave us all in the dust, Wyman said. Mayhap he takes after her, then, Wylis said. Mayhap he does, Wyman, said, his eyes glassing over, as he thought of Lyanna Stark. The she-wolf was just what House Stark needs right now, he thought. He'd been disappointed in his liege lord on the few occasions he'd visited since Jon Snow's departure, both in the lack of recognition the boy got and the lack of speaking about him he'd heard when there. Apart from the oldest daughter, which had surprised Wyman, none spoke fondly of or seemed to miss the lad at all. He shook his head. This was a night of celebration. On the morrow, he could worry and think on such things. He'd speak to Lord Jaime and Howland and try to find out more of what his friend was up to. He'd also speak to his granddaughters and see what their impression of the lad was. Both had danced extensively with the boy, and Winifred had seemed especially happy to do so. For now, though, he'd enjoy the rest of the feast, even though it was winding down for the evening. Jon. Laying in bed, Jon felt more tired than he had ever felt during sparring or dueling. He had danced more times tonight than he had thought possible, and looking down at the favor tied to his belt, he felt a little guilty about it. Twice he had danced with Margaery, and both times had needed to hide it from view. Yet here he was allowed to dance with the Lord's granddaughters, and while both girls were pleasant, they weren't Margaery. Rosardo's giggles or Winifred's smile didn't compare to Margaery's lopsided grin, or her smirk. Their dancing, though clearly well-trained, didn't make his heart race as his dances with Margaery did. In fact, apart from Lady Meera, he had in some way found himself comparing them unfavorably with Margaery all night. Lord Howland's daughter, though, was different. She intrigued him mainly because of how she and her brother seemed to always be looking at him when he turned to them. Josian was odd, plain and simple, how he spoke, the look he got in his eyes. The boy was no more than 7 name days, yet sounded more world-weary than his uncle ever had. Meera, on the other hand, was everything the boy was not. Where he was quiet, she was lively. Where he was serious, she was a japister. Dancing with her, she asked questions unlike any girl he had ever met. She spoke of Ghost, and asked had he brought him hunting yet, had he let him run free in the north. All things which he would never have expected her to be interested in. He tried to clear his mind of his thoughts, knowing if he did not, then he'd find no rest this night. Ghostly by the fire, his wolf seemingly happy to be back in the north, he had assumed he'd want to go hunting, or at least run free outside of the city. But when they'd been shown to his rooms, the wolf had laid down and just seemed happy to be there. The large leg of elk he'd been given helped somewhat in that regard. Jon suspected the rooms themselves had been a surprise. Having been expected to at best be given a room close to Lord Yane, he'd been stunned to be shown. Instead, to the family wing, he'd wished to protest, but thought better of it. Perhaps Lord Wyman would consider it an insult should he raise a fuss, and not accept the honor he was being afforded. His egg lay untouched in its chest. It was still giving him the same problems he had been having with it since they began the journey. As he lay in bed, he looked longingly at the wooden chest. He missed having it close. Sighing, he turned over to get some sleep. But the dream came not long after he closed his eyes. The girl ran from the hall, tears streaming down her face, tears of anger, tears of frustration. The courtyard was full, though no one dared get in her way. As she ran to the entrance to the Godswood, sitting down in front of the heart tree, she shouted out in rage, "Why couldn't they understand? Why couldn't they see?" She had not expected her oldest brother to take her part. His own wild nature was being curbed, and he wouldn't allow anyone else the freedom he was being denied. Her quiet brother, though she had thought would understand, thought he would be on her side. Though he cared only for his friend's feelings and not for hers, she heard the footsteps behind her and turned. Her youngest brother carrying something warm in a bowl. "What's this?" she asked. "I thought you'd be hungry. It's been hours since you were inside." "Has it really? I didn't notice," she said, and wolfed down the deliciously hot stew. "What will you do?" "I'll not marry him. I'll run rather than marry that boy." "Is he really that bad?" "He's a fool. He cares not for me. While I was there, he bedded at least 2 servants. I'll fucking kill him. Why didn't you tell me?" "It's no use. They're all against me, father. Brandon, Ned, only you're on my side. Benjen." "I'll always be on your side, Liax." Jon woke up and found Ghost laying on the bed beside him, his head resting on his chest. He had seen his mother. That was his mother, and the smile on his face made him ignore the pain in his heart. Benjen, his uncle, knew. He knew she didn't want to marry Robert. So did his other uncle. What was it that his mother had felt that he cared more for his friend than her? Was that true? Did he care more for Robert's feelings than for his own sister's? Does he still? Ghost woke up and licked his face as he was trying to make sense of those thoughts. Jon, though, had an idea. He got out of bed and washed and dressed himself quickly. Walking from the room, he went looking for the maester's chambers, Ghost following behind him. After meeting a serving girl who pointed him in the right direction, he walked up the stairs and knocked on the door. It took a few moments, but finally the door was opened. A fat blonde man stood there looking dismissively at him. Before he then saw Ghost and moved to pet the wolf. Ghost, though, showed his teeth in a silent snarl, which clearly scared him so much that it almost made him to slam the door on them. "What do you want, boy?" "Maester, I was wondering if you have some ink and parchment." "Who are you, boy?" "Jon Snow, Maester." "Be off with you, lad. I'll not waste good parchment on an illiterate bastard," the master said, and made to close the door. "I'm sure Lord Jaime will be pleased to hear it," Jon said, and grimaced at the lie. "Lord Jaime Lannister, you serve Lord Jaime, lad?" the maester asked, his voice much friendlier now. I do. I'm his squire." "You're that Jon Snow. Why didn't you say, 'Come in'?" "Come in. Bring your wolf with you." "Ghost is a dire wolf, master." "Indeed. How fascinating. I'd love to examine him if given the chance." Jon looked to a clearly unimpressed Ghost. If the wolf could speak, he'd be certain that he'd be telling the maester off very rudely. "I don't think Ghost would allow that, would you, boy?" Jon sat and sniggered when the wolf emphatically shook his head. "Remarkable," the maester said, and walked to a set of shelves, returning with some parchment, a quill, and some ink. "I thank you, master." "Think nothing of it, lad. Lord Jaime and I are kin after all," the maester said with a large smile on his face. Jon just nodded and left before making his way to the nearest alcove. Luckily, he found one with a large window seat. Sitting down, he began to draw. The first pick was good, but not good enough. It took him until the third to get the image right. When he was finished, he looked closely at it. Had he colored ink, he'd do a better job, but it was as he'd seen her. "Mother," he said softly, as he held the picture up. "Howland." When Josian came to him to tell him that they had to go to White Harbor, Howland had not questioned it. If his son said it was needed, then it was the old gods who had told him so. So he, Meera, and Josian and some guards had made the journey, and arrived a few days ago. He had initially stayed at the tavern his men used, wanting to get the lay of the land before going to meet Wyman. It took no more than a few days for the reason for their journey to be made clear to him. Hearing Jon Snow was on his way made him feel a sense of nervous excitement. He'd not felt in a long time. To see her son here, and in the flesh, was something he had wished for a very long time. He had been surprised at some of the gossip doing the rounds. That there had been a tourney in King's Landing was no surprise. That Lord Jaime Lannister was apparently coming to White Harbor, though, he had expected Jon to be coming alone, but he was glad Jaime was coming with him. He wished to get the measure of the man, though everything he'd heard was positive. He was still a man who stuck a sword in the back of a king, a man his liege lord had dubbed the Kingslayer. To know this was the man who Lyanna's son was being looked after by had worried him, but the reports he'd gotten back had lessened his concern. Still far better to see the man for himself and be his own judge, his liege's opinion, not one he was sure could be counted on anymore. Ned had disappointed him time and time again, both in word and deed. His actions towards Lyanna's son had made him furious, but funnily enough, it was his actions since the boy had left that annoyed him more now. Wyman had informed him in a letter of what had occurred during his visit. It was after that, for the first time in years, he had been invited to come to Winterfell, something he had no intent of doing. "Father, they've arrived," Meera said, coming into the room. "You saw them, saw him." "Aye, father, both him and the wolf. He's enormous, father, bigger than any wolf I've ever seen. He's a dire wolf, Meera." "What's the boy like?" "He seems nice, father, friendly." "The wolf seems friendly too." Meera set a smile on her face. "What say you, Josian? Is it time to visit the merman's court?" "It is, father. We should make ourselves known." Howland sighed. He was a man who kept things close to his chest, but compared to his son, he was the most open person alive. His son did not do explanations until things needed to be explained, something about things needing to happen in a certain way. So they made their way to the new castle and were welcomed in. He spoke only briefly to Lord Wyman, not sure what he could say to explain their visit, since apart from seeing Jon Snow, the other reasons were still unknown to him. That night at the feast, he finally got the chance to watch the boy closely, and he didn't disappoint. He was her son, that much was clear, though some of the Dragon Prince's appearance and mannerisms were present. He had no doubt that those who knew the prince best would recognize his father in him before long, while those who knew Lyanna would see only the she-wolf. A few times during the night, he watched as Josian clearly unnerved the boy. Meera, though, was quick to step in and smooth things over. At one point, he'd almost came over to him, and Howland had been glad to see something else distract him. He wasn't sure what he would say to the boy, what he would tell him. Did he know the truth? If not, should Howland tell him? Would he break his word to Ned? Luckily, in the end, he didn't need to do anything. The night passed without incident, and he went to bed that night, glad for the respite. He knew he'd need to speak to the boy on the morrow, knew he could give him answers to questions no one else could, but should he? His dreams that night were fitful and almost merged into one. He stood on the Isle of Faces, the weir woods surrounding him almost boxing him in. He could hear one whispered word over and over. Harrenhal. He was on the ground, the kicks coming in. He felt helpless, until a voice called, and he was saved. They marched to war. He rode near his liege, Lord who laughed with the stag. They were in a camp. He came to a tent. The sounds inside were of someone coupling. He moved to walk away, but the flap opened and he saw the large lord of the Stormlands as he pushed in from behind, the young girl seeming tiny in comparison. They rode through a desert, a rocky landscape in front of them, a tower rising from high. There were bodies on the ground, white cloaks covered in blood. One man alone still breathing. The screams came from high in the tower. He was riding while carrying a babe, his dark eyes looking up at him. His heart felt heavy, but he did what he had sworn to do. A voice came out of the ether, a voice he knew all too well. He turned, hoping to see her face or see the horse she was no doubt riding, only for there to be no sign of either. He was back then in front of the tower. Leaning down, he poured the liquid into the man's mouth. His purple eyes looked at him sadly. He heard it again, the voice louder now, the words clearer in his mind. "He needs to know the truth, Howland, it's time. But I promised I would not tell." He promised too, Howland. You know what he promised. You heard it, did you not? I heard. Tell him all, everything. Tell him of Arthur. It's time, Howland, it's time for him to return, to serve the king. Tell him, and consider your debt paid in full. Waking up, Howland knew what he must do. He dressed and made his way to break his fast. His daughter and son were sitting at the table, with Wyman's granddaughters and the Tyrell boy. Beside them, Lord Jaime was laughing. The White Wolf was leaning against the table and grabbing the sausage Lyanna's boy was holding for him. "Father, good morning, here sit," Meera said, bringing everyone's attention to him. "In a while, Meera, Lord Jaime, Jon. May I have a word?" "Lord Jaime Lannister said, looking at him confusedly before looking to Jon, who nodded and stood up. Jon. Jon followed Jaime and Lord Reed from the hall, Ghost walking alongside him. His wolf was acting strangely, almost as if he was nervous, though considering Jon was too, perhaps it wasn't a surprise. Ahead of him, Jaime tried to get Lord Reed to give them a clue where they were going and why, but the diminutive Crandogman was giving nothing away. They walked from the new castle itself down into the city streets. Ghost beside him drawing stares, though for some reason the wolf was on his best behavior. He could see Jaime getting more and more agitated by Lord Reed's reluctance to explain where they were going. Moving forward, Jon touched him on the back, and when Jaime looked at him, Jon nodded and smiled, calming him down for now. Eventually, after walking for some time, he saw it in the distance and realized exactly where they were being led. The black stone and crumbling walls were a sharp contrast to the whitewashed buildings nearby. Ahead of them was a gate, and 2 guards stood sentry, both carrying tridents that were taller than they were. Jon looked on as Lord Reed walked forward. The 2 guards were not looking eager to allow them access. It took a while before they finally gave in. "Follow me," Lord Reed said, his first words to him since he'd come to them while they were breaking their fast. "What's this about?" Jaime asked, his annoyance clear. "All in good time, my lord. There's a place inside where we can speak freely." Jaime shook his head, but both he and Jon followed the lord into the wolf's den itself. Jon was in awe as he looked around. For centuries, this fortress had held the white knife from raiders. Though, just like Moat Cailin, it had fallen into disrepair, it was still clear just how impressive this would have looked at one time. As they walked inside, a man came towards them with some more guards. The man had 1 leg and 1 eye and leaned on a crutch to walk, and yet Jon could see there was a strength to him. Lord Reed stopped before him and smiled. "Sir Bartimus, it's good to see you, old friend." "Aye, you too, Howland. But what brings you here?" The man said gruffly, though not without a hint of fondness. "I wish to pray in the Godswood, my companions too." "Very well, I'll see you're not disturbed. You know the way. I'd escort you, but I don't get around as well as I once did," Bartimus said with a hollow laugh. "None of us do anymore, Bartimus." Howland replied. Sir Bartimus turned and walked away, and Howland led them onward. Eventually, they came to the Godswood. The weirwood at the center was huge, so big that its branches passed through the nearby windows. The face carved into the tree leaked, its red sap, its eyes crying almost as if it looked upon them with great sadness. Jon watched as Howland knelt before it and began speaking so softly that the words could not be made out. After a few moments, he stood up and looked at them. "Jon, you know what they say of an oath spoken in front of the heart tree?" "Aye, my lord, that to break such an oath is to risk the wrath of the gods." "Hey, and what do they say about lying in front of one Jon?" "That it cannot be done, that the gods will know if you don't speak the truth," Jon said, and Howland nodded. "I brought you here so you'd both know that what I said was the truth, and that any oath I swore would be sworn in front of mine own gods." "Very well, my lord," Jaime said, looking to Jon confusedly. Howland suddenly got down on one knee, and Jon felt his breath catch in his throat. He felt his heart beat race, and his chest grew heavy. Ghost immediately came to him, and Jon reached his hand into the wolf's fur, feeling the lightness return almost at once. "I swear myself to the one true king, Jaehaerys Targaryen, the third of his name. I shall offer my counsel, my sword, my fealty to you above all others. I do this in the name of the old gods, the true gods, and let them strike me down, should I fail to honor this oath, or fail to speak the truth this day." Jon looked on stunned, a feeling that Jaime seemed to be matching. He had never expected this, had thought perhaps that he may, if luck was with him, hear tell of his mother from Lord Reed, that the story of how his mother and the Crandog men met at Harrenhal could perhaps be related to him, even if the nature of his relationship with her was considered more a nephew than a son. But knowing that Lord Reed knew the full truth opened up so many questions in his mind, so many possibilities that he was actually dumbstruck. "My lord, please rise. I don't know what to say. Will you accept my fealty, my king?" "I will, my lord, with great honor and humility," Jon said, and watched a smile appear on Lord Reed's face as he rose. "No doubt you have many questions, Jon. You too, Lord Jaime. I suggest you take a seat. We may be here some time. There is much you both need to know." The three of them looked around the heart tree for somewhere to sit, Jaime looking at Lord Reed with suspicion still. Something Jon found surprising. Why, if the Lord had pledged to him, was Jaime not overjoyed? What was it he wasn't seeing here? It took him a few moments to figure it out, and when he did, he too began to look at Lord Reed. The same way. "My lord, how did you know Lord Jaime knew the truth?" Jon asked, and noticed Jaime nod to him, thankful he asked the question on both their minds. "Ever since Lord Jaime asked for you to be his squire, I've wondered why he did so." Jon wondered why he'd take a northern lad as his squire. "No doubt you're talented, and what you achieved since you've gone west is incredible. But that still doesn't answer why Lord Jaime Lannister would take the bastard of Winterfell as a squire. Forgive me for calling you that. Jon, it's fine, my lord. Jon waved off the apology with a shake of his head. So, I've watched and waited, and last night, and today, I saw it. How Lord Yaxley looks when someone unknown comes to speak to you. How he almost bristles when someone looks as if they may disrespect you. When I asked to speak to you both, it was you, Jon, who gave Lord Jaime a nod. Here as we walked to this place, it was you who did the same. Why would the Warden of the West be taking orders from his squire? For what reason would he be following your lead? The simple answer is, he wouldn't, no matter how highly he thought of him, of you, but for his king, well, that's different. Howland set a soft smile on his face. Jon nodded and looked to Jaime, who nodded in agreement. They would need to speak together later to see if anyone else was beginning to notice, or was Lord Reed just more intuitive, because he already knew Jon's truth. My lord, can you tell me of my mother, of what happened? Can you tell me the truth? Jon asked, his voice trembling with emotion. It would be my honor, Jon. Howland. He had knelt before his gods and then his king, both feeling equally as right to him. The weight he'd carried deep within him for over 10 years was finally something he need not bear. As he sat looking at Jon and Jaime, he wondered where he should begin. Harrenhal, the Tower of Joy, both were as important as the other. Perhaps the beginning would be best. He sighed and began to recount the worst days of his life. 10 years ago, I made a pilgrimage to see the weirwoods on the Isle of Phaeduses, after which I went to Harrenhal, which is where I first met your mother, Jon. Aye, the night of the laughing tree, Jon said, smiling. You know this tale. Some, my lord, but you lived it, did you not? Jon said, and Howland nodded. Aye. That I did. Your mother was special, Jon, strong, determined, and fierce. When I was attacked, she stormed right up to those boys, chasing them off with a wooden sword. She tried to get me to ride against them to regain my honor, but I was no horseman then or now, nor could I joust, so she took it upon herself, rode them down all for honor, something I'm glad to see you replicate. You heard of the joust? Aye, just like your mother, you are, lad. Howland said and watched as Jaime smiled at the boy. What happened after the joust, my lord? Jon asked. I was close to your mother, Jon. After she saved me, I spent a lot of time with her. Saw her with Robert and with Rhaegar, one who loved her for who she was, and one who loved the idea he had of her. There's a big difference, you know, when you see the one you love, see the person you're supposed to be with. All else just fades away. Reason thought all that is somehow lost while you're caught up in the hope. The hope? Jaime asked, a curious look on his face. Of what's to come, my lord. The hope of what's to come. Nothing else makes us hope so much as love. It makes us see things we had not dared to dream before. I felt it when I first saw my Jainta. I believe your father and mother felt it when they saw each other for the first time. Jon, he took a breath as he watched both Jaime and Jon sit with differing looks on their face, both of them picturing or perhaps trying to imagine what he was saying. What about Robert, my lord? Jon asked. He never loved your mother, Jon. Despite what he said at Harrenhal, he shamed her more than once. Not for the first time, I learned later, but your mother was not one to accept such a thing. So she did not. I do not know when she first told him, but I do know she did. She would not marry him, no matter what. I do know he did not take it well. Did he? Jon asked, his hands trembling. No, Jon, not that I know of. Had he done so, he'd have never left Harrenhal alive. Brandon may have been wild, and Ned quiet, but had he laid a hand on your mother, they'd have killed him. Howland watched as Jaime reached his hand out to hold the boy's shoulder, before Jon nodded for him to continue. Over the course of the tourney, your parents fell completely in love, Jon. I do not know of the details. There's only one man alive who does. But I know they met often and in secret, and when I'd look at them, well, I've never seen a man or woman look so happy. What happened after the tourney? Jon asked. When Abiris gave up his search for the Night of the Laughing Tree, when the joust was done, and the smiles died, as people say, though they forget to mention the smiles on your mother's face or your father's. People can call them foolish if they want, but not to me, not when I'm present. I'll not have them speak of those they did not know. When we left to travel home, your mother was different. She was happier, though she spoke to no one of what had occurred between Rhaegar and her. Had she done so, then perhaps, Howland said, and had to stop to brush a tear from his eye. Do you need some water, my lord? Jon asked, moving towards him. No thanks, Jon. I'm good. Where was I? You were heading back home, my lord. We traveled and parted at Motalin, and I went back to the life I'd had before. until the news came from King's Landing and the banners were called. "You didn't know of the kidnapping?" Jaime asked. "There was no kidnapping." Howland said loudly, I know. I meant you hadn't heard of Lady Lyanna's disappearance." "Oh no, my lord, not then. It wasn't until later I found out. The war had started, though, and we were in the thick of it. Nothing about your mother would have helped them. Ned was lost in grief, you see, so when I tried to speak to him, he would not hear of it, which I can understand." "He should have listened, perhaps, then," Jon said. "No, Jon, he was not in the right frame of mind, not then, his brother, his father. No, I may have mine own disagreements with your uncle, but on this I'll not let it be said. Hearing of your mother wouldn't have stopped what came next." "He's right, Jon. War focuses the mind on one thing. Survival," Jaime said, and Jon reluctantly nodded his head. "Before the trident, though I thought, then he might. Robert was he was enraged and loudly proclaimed he'd kill your father for taking your mother from him, loudly proclaimed his love, while every night he would even more loudly entertain some whore or camp follower." Howland said, his disgust clear in his voice. He did that while claiming to love my mother. He did that." Jon stood up and Howland watched in shock as he began to punch and kick the heart tree in his rage, the red sap flowing freely as he did so. He moved to stop him, but Lord Jaime held his hand out and walked to the boy. Grabbing him tightly, he watched as Jon's punches grew softer against Jaime's chest before finally stopping. The two standing there together, Jaime speaking softly as he held the boy close. It took a few more moments before they returned, and Jon sat down once again. "I apologize, my lord. I shouldn't have," Jon said, and Howland nodded, knowing he wished to speak no more of it. "I tried to get Ned to parley, tried to explain there was no way your mother would have been taken, even tried to explain that I believed them to be in love, but even if Ned was willing to think on it, Robert and Jon Arryn were not. After I was doing speaking to him, then they would start, and by the end it was pointless. The story was written, and not one of us had the power to change it. You know what happened next, and there's no point in repeating it here, nor shall I speak of King's Landing, not now, other than to say after what happened in the throne room, your uncle's eyes opened regarding Robert. When we were sent to break the siege, he had all but decided never to speak to the man again. When we heard your mother was in Dorne, it filled us with a sense of purpose. We could at least bring her home. But when we got there, we found we were too late." Jaime, he felt the emotions of his king as keenly as if they were his own. His anger, his rage, his helplessness as the crannogman laid out secrets that he had thought forever lost. He had known Robert to treat his sister with contempt, to lay with serving wenches, whores, and any who took his fancy. He had known of his fathering a bastard in the Vale and another at Storm's End. But that he was acting the same with Lady Lyanna was a shock to him. He remembered all the times he'd heard the drunk king claim her as the love of his life. Yet he was the same as always, even with her. It angered him all the more for some reason. Despite his own feelings toward his sister, he had perhaps accepted that Cersei had no chance to compete with a dead woman, but now knowing that none could compete with Robert's own appetites, it had angered him greatly. Though whence compared to Jon's, his anger was a small brief thing. He had never seen the boy this way. Jumping up, he'd stopped Lord Reed from going to his king. As he held the boy tightly, he could feel the sobs against his chest, the emotions forcing him to take deep breaths just to stay composed. How could he? How could he? Jon's voice was muffled against his chest. "Let it out, Jon. Just let it out." When he calmed down, Jaime walked with him back to Howland Reed and listened on as the rest of the tale was told. It wasn't until he got to speaking of Dorne, though, that Jaime's interest in what was being said perked up. Until then, he'd been far too busy watching Jon's reactions, far too concerned with his feelings to listen too attentively to what was being said. But now he would find out what had happened to his brothers, to Arthur. "When we arrived at the tower, 3 men stood facing us, the Kingsguard, your Kingsguard, Jon, your uncle, myself, and 5 others against 3 of the finest knights in the land, one of them the Sword of the Morning himself. I tried to interject, tried to have them see reason, but tempers were frayed and words were spoken in haste. When the scream came from the tower, all was lost. My mother, she was alive when you got there," Jon said, his voice near breaking. "Aye, she was, which made the situation more desperate, and meant calmer heads would not prevail that day. Sir Gerwald fell first, though he struck a blow on Martin Castle, which would be the end of him. When moments later Sir Gerwaswell took him down. I do not know who struck the blow on Sir Gerwaswell, but it was 6 of us left against Sir Arthur. We had him outnumbered, though it was us who were outmatched. Jane smirked, despite the seriousness of what was being said. 6 blades against the finest swordsman that ever lived. He cut through us like we were nothing. Like mere boys against a man. His blade was so quick, so fast, that none could get close, and one by one they fell. Mark, Theo, Ethan, William, and then I. Howland said sadly, "You, my lord?" Jon asked doubtfully. Howland stood up and pulled aside his cloak, reaching in to open his undercoat and take out his shirt. He showed the scar where the blade cut him clean through the side. Had Arthur wanted him dead, he'd have lain with the others, but for some reason he had let him live. "Aye, a wound, though, a bad one. I lay down as your uncle and Arthur fought, though it did not last long." "My uncle slew him," Jon said softly. "No, Jon, he did not. As I watched, I saw Arthur disarm him, and I mistook his intentions. Had I not, then, I would never, but I thought he was about to kill Ned. I took my blade and stuck him while he faced your uncle down. The blade cut through his back and out his side, and he fell." You killed Arthur. You stabbed him from behind like a coward. You killed the greatest knight, the greatest man I've ever known, like a damn coward." Jaime said, his voice full of rage. Grabbing Howland by the throat, he pushed him towards the heart tree. Let him die close to his gods, he thought, as he pushed him against it. He could feel a pressure on his arm. A pulling, and he tried to ignore it, but it got more persistent. In his rage, he lashed out, only to miss whatever it was he was aiming at. He turned back to the Crannog man, this small, unimportant man who'd killed a legend, this man who'd allowed Ned Stark take credit for killing the Sword of the Morning. Pulling his hand back, he prepared to end him. "Jaime is your king, I command you to stop." Jon's voice said loudly, and he deflated almost at once. "He killed Arthur. Please, Jon, don't stop me." Jaime said, his pain clear, before he got the chance to reply. Howland spoke. "I didn't know Arthur Dayne lives still." "What do you mean Arthur's alive?" Jon said as Jaime moved away from Howland in shock. He's alive, I swear it on the old gods." Jon looked from Howland to Jaime, who was pacing like a caged animal. He walked over to Jaime and stopped in front of him, reaching his hand out. He placed it on his chest. He can't be, Jon, he'd have never. Had he known, he'd have never." Jaime said, his words tumbling from his mouth. "We need to find out what happened. Jaime. Howland's telling the truth, but we need to let him finish. Can you do that?" I can." They walked over to Howland, who had regained his composure and his breath. He looked at Jaime warily, but when Jon nodded to him, he relaxed somewhat. "After Arthur fell, Ned ran to the tower. I followed a few moments later, when I got there. Your mother she hadn't much time left," Howland said shakily before continuing. "She told Ned what happened, that she and your father were married, how she was sorry it had gone so wrong. She begged him to protect you from Robert, to let you lead the life you should have, to be the man you should be. She held you in her arms one last time, kissed you on your head, and told you she loved you, that you were her dragon wolf." Jaime turned to see the tears falling freely from Jon's eyes. He watched as Jon wiped them away, after a moment, and bid Howland continue. "When Ned told me what he planned, we didn't agree. I wanted to take you back to Greywater Watch. You'd have been safe there. We could have. It doesn't matter. He was your uncle, and my liege, so he made me swear not to speak of it, and I did not. Until now." "Why now?" Jaime said, voicing the question he knew Jon would, if he wasn't as upset as he clearly was. I dreamed of Lyanna. She told me to." Howland said, and Jaime saw Jon turn quickly to face Howland, a look of concern on his face. "What happened with Arthur?" Jon asked a moment later, surprising both Jaime and Howland, that this was the question he chose to ask. "We needed to bury the bodies, to prepare for your journey and bring your mother home. The midwife was a woman named Willa, and she agreed to look after you. She was from a village, a couple of days' ride from the tower, and gave Ned the name of someone he could buy a cart from and get supplies, so Ned rode of, and after tending to my wound, I went to take care of the bodies. When I got to Arthur, he was still breathing. He shouldn't have been. The wound may not have been enough to kill him, but the poison on the blade should have done so." "You used poison?" Jaime said angrily. "Look at me, Lord Jaime. How am I supposed to beat a knight?" "You're damn right. I used poison, and I'd use it again." "What of honor, my lord?" Jon asked. "What use is honor if you're dead? Jon, honor serves a purpose, and it's good to live up to it, or to try to. But when you're fighting for your life, the only thing that matters is that you win." Howland said as Jon looked at him curiously. "So the poison should have killed him, my lord?" Jon asked. How he was still alive I knew not, but he opened his eyes, and the first words out of his mouth made me save him. What did he say? Jon said, looking at him intently. Are Lyanna and the babes safe? Both Jon and Jaime smiled at this. Even facing death, Arthur was a Kingsguard, where another man may ask for mercy or even a clean death. His thoughts were as they always were, with his duty. I always carry some antidotes, just in case. Poisoning blades can be tricky, and should someone get a hold of mine own blade during a fight and use it on me, well, it's better to be prepared. So after telling him about your mother and that you were alive and well, we spoke some. I gave him a choice. If he promised to leave and not return unless I asked it of him, if he'd promise it on his honor, on his king, then I'd save him. If not, he'd leave me with no choice. And Arthur accepted. Jaime said, shaking his head doubtfully. No, he laughed at me. He actually laughed at me before he spoke. Howland said, remembering it as if he was still there, the image clear in his head as he repeated the words. You think my life is some precious thing to me, that I would trade my honor for a few more years of what? I am a Kingsguard. My lord and the child is my king, yet you would ask me to what? To walk away and leave him helpless and without protection. His uncle will protect him. Ned Stark is a good man, and true, but not of the Kingsguard. Would he lay his life down for the boy? Put him before his very own family. Would he forswear the oaths he swore to the usurper who sits his nephew's rightful throne? If you can tell me that and call it true, my lord, then I call you a liar and bid you to allow me die. You need to leave, sir, to live. I give you my word here, and now that one day I shall send for you, one day when the boy needs you most, I shall send for you. I swear it on the old gods. I swear it on the love I bore for the woman who should have been our queen. For Lyanna, for her boy, you swear it for them? Arthur asked. I do, sir. Then I swear on my honor not to return until you send for me. I swear it on the old gods and the new. So we came to an agreement. I gave him the antidote, and he recovered. We covered an empty grave, and the sword of the morning was no more. When your uncle came back, we left the tower and gave Dawn back to the Danes before making our way home. So where is Arthur? Jaime asked. Volantis. You can contact him? Jon said. Aye, I can. Should I? Jon looked to Jaime. He nodded. Aye, tell him it's time to come home. His king has need of him. Jon said. Women. This day had been strange to say the least. After waking he went to break his fast, only to find Lord Jaime and Jon had gone off somewhere with Howland, and that Loras and the Mormonts had gone on a shopping spree of all things. Luckily, his granddaughters and sons were still there, which gave him an opportunity to speak to them about Jon Snow. Sitting at the table, though, he knew that this would not be the place for the talk he wished. The hall, while not full, still had far too many eyes and ears, so he instead spoke far more simply than he wished. Did you enjoy the feast last night, girls? Hey, we did. Grandfather, the dancing was most fun. Willa said, her ever-present smirk on her face. What about you, Winifred? He asked. Noticing his other granddaughter was a little quieter. I did, it was fine. Grandfather. Winifred? He looked at her questioningly. It's nothing, grandfather, I thought I'd get to dance more with Jon, but Willa and the other girls kept interrupting, she said, scowling a little at her sister. It's not my fault. He was a much better dancer than Laura's Yats. Willa said mischievously, You're lucky it wasn't me who accompanied him. I'd have never let anyone else dance with him, she added. The two girls continued to jab at each other, and Wylis just looked on fondly while Wendell looked at him and rolled his eyes, forcing Wyman to give a short snort. After breaking his fast, he asked Wylis and Wendell to his solar. He wished to hear of Wendell's discussions with the Karstocks and their own impressions of their guests. So how goes it with young Harrion and Torrin? Well, father, I think they can more than cover the shortfall if Bear Island supplies the West. Also, it's far easier to bring it or collect it than it is from some of the other lords. Very well done, son. The quicker turnaround and delivery will help reduce costs. This could work out very well indeed. I think Winifred may have taken a liking to young Jon, Wysilis said with a smirk. What think you of the match? Wyman asked, raising an eyebrow. If he was trueborn, I'd be all for it immediately. Even with his baseborn status, it would be an interesting match, though perhaps Lord Robb is a better choice. Father? I'm not so sure, but you're probably right. It is something to ponder on. You were right about Lord Yansen. Father? Wendell said, confused. Aye, he dotes on the boy. It's far more than squire and knight. He looks on the lad as if he was his own. Wyman said, and both his sons nodded in agreement. Will you speak to him about Lord Stark and Lady Catelyn? Wylis asked. Aye, he should know what he's heading into, given what happened with her brother. The lad may face an even more hostile reception. Should I accompany them, father? I could let Lord Stark know what happened. Wendell asked. No, son, I want to find out how Ned reacts. Let's wait and see for now. His sons looked at him trying to figure out his mind, but Wyman was far too practiced for that. His liege had disappointed him enough in relation to the lad. Let's see if he took his wife's side on this also. He would warn Lord Jaime and let him know what to expect. But he was interested to find out if everything Jon had done would be appreciated by his father. The boy had helped the North out greatly. His father should be proud of him, just like he was with his own sons. Lord, yes. Watching as Jon and Jaime left with Lord Reed, Loras felt a little left out, though soon enough he had another person to occupy his mind. His aunt and her husband had arrived and sat down at the table. His aunt seemingly in better spirits than she had been as she ate ravenously at the table. The small smile she gave him warmed his heart and made his thoughts of being alone feel lessened. On your own this morning, lad? Ser Jorah asked. Aye, Lord Jaime and Jon have gone off with Meera and Josian's father. I'm sorry I can't remember his name, he said apologetically to the girl sitting across from him beside her brother. Howland, my father's name is Howland, Loras, Meera said with a smile. So you've nothing to do then? His aunt asked. No, not for some time anyway. How about you accompany me to the seamstress? I know you've ordered a new cloak, but perhaps we can find some other items for you to wear. Aye, I'd like that, Loras said, smiling. They finished breaking their fast, and he, Leness, Lady Daisy, her sisters, and Meera made their way to some of the shops and stalls in the center of White Harbor. He was surprised to pass a clearly worried Jors and Allers who he had thought had gone with Jaime and Jon. Seeing him, they quickly came over. Have you seen Jon, Loras? Jors. Aye, he, and Lord Jaime went off with Lord Howland. Lord said. Lord Reed, Lorasier, Meera said with a smirk. Sorry, I mean Lord Reed, I'm not sure where they went though. Do you know Meera? I don't, but Ghost was with them, and they'll be back shortly. You have no need to worry for them. Not here. Jinsers and others nodded, though Meera's words clearly had not had the desired effect, and Loras was tempted to go with them looking for Jon and Jaime. But his aunt grabbed his arm and left him in no doubt. She wouldn't appreciate it. For the rest of the day, they had gone to shop after shop, stall after stall. Loras was glad in the end that Jon wasn't with them. Had he been, then he'd now be carrying even more packages. He had been surprised at the quality of clothing available. While his new cloak was still a few days from being ready, he had found some new boots, some warm doublets, and some breeches that were far warmer than his own. Some of the clothing needed to be altered, but he was glad he had found warmer clothes, and that they were in his family colors had been a surprise. His aunt had bought him a beautiful belt for him to hang his sword from, its red leather and green inserts appealing to his more colorful taste. I'm very glad to spend this time with you, nephew, his aunt said, handing him the belt. Me too? I had feared once you went north you'd rarely be seen again. Aunt. Lors yept. Hey, me too. I'm glad for the chance to visit with family, though not too many make the visit to Bear Island, she said sadly. Perhaps when the work is done with the docks, it may become easier. With regular journeys by the Pinnacle ships, maybe they could stop off in Old Town. Lorches said, smiling, I hadn't thought of that. You're right. That's an excellent idea. Nephew, his aunt said, giving him a hug. What are you two so happy about? Daisy asked. Loras just had a great idea. He was telling me once things are up and running with the trade deal, we'll be part of a trade route down the coast. Bear Island to Old Town could be done in half the time with the Pinnacle ships. Aye, a trip from Lannisport to Bear Island even quicker, Lorasier said, and noticed the look his aunt gave Daisy. Do you think Lord Jaime would allow for passengers on a trade shipment? His aunt asked. I can bring it up with him. I can't see why he wouldn't, Loras said, glad he could be of use. Do you hear that, Daisy? We could be having regular visits between Lannisport and Bear Island soon, his aunt said, and Loras looked on as Daisy gave her an odd look. Before he could figure out what he was missing, Meera and Daisy's two sisters came back from their own little shopping adventure. All three girls, having no interest in buying clothing, had instead rushed to the nearest smithy, something Loras was now jealous he had not. Meera was holding a long dirk in her hands, while the two Mormont sisters were both holding daggers. The quality was far better than he expected. Look at this Dace. Isn't it beautiful? Jory, the youngest of Daisy's sisters, said. Mine is prettier, Lyra said beside her. They're both pretty, but I'd take Meera's dirk over both of them, Daisy said, and the dark-haired girl smiled. Aye. Meera said, and Loras smirked at the quick move she made while holding it in her hand. Woe to the fool who thought any of these women were easy pickings, he thought as he looked at the northern ladies. They began to walk back to the new castle, and he was happy to see the white wolf running towards him. Its tongue sticking out, it licked his hand before doing the same to each of the others. Surprisingly, even when Jon and Jaime and Lord Reed arrived, the wolf sat beside his aunt, and only moved on when she did. Jon looking at the wolf confusedly. So, what have you been up to? He said, turning to Jon. Nothing much. Can we talk later, you and I? Jon said, and Loras nodded. The strange look his friend was giving him, filling him with concern. Josian! Jon Snow was more than he expected. While not trained, his control over his direwolf was very impressive. The connection the two had stronger than he had thought it would be. Just passing the two, he could feel the strength of their bond. But still, it was almost as if it was muted somehow. When the dream came telling him to come here, he wasn't sure what to expect. Sometimes he received it perfectly clearly. Others, it was only part of the puzzle. With this one, it was simple. Go to White Harbor and meet Jon Snow. So he had told his father, and for the first time in years, his father had left their home. Traveling wasn't easy on him. Josian knew that, but the chance to see Jon Snow was something he wasn't going to give up. When they arrived, he had waited, and yet, nothing. No dream, no vision. All he knew was he was where he was supposed to be. Last night, after the feast that had changed, he knew now his purpose was to teach Jon how to control his bond with Ghost and with any other animal he would find as his familiar. The sheer magical power that resonated off Jon was incredible. His own felt insignificant compared to it. His father's minute, it was as if they were mere fireflies, while Jon Snow was the sun itself. He knew his gods had a purpose for the boy. No one would be given that power unless it was for some grand design. His part was simple. Teach him how to control parts of it, to learn how to warg, to be able to do it at will, that he could teach easily. But he wondered if there was more. Did Jon see like he did? Did he dream? A part of Josian thought he didn't. Hoped he didn't, for it took a lot to see those things. Magic usually had a price. His gods had shown him this. It weighed heavily on him. But on Jon, he sensed no weight at all. So maybe he was the only one. The thoughts of being alone filled him with both fear and a sense of sadness. For no one else to be able to understand you was a horrible way to spend a life, or as much of one as you were allowed to have. Why didn't you come with us? Meera said, walking into their room. I didn't feel up to it. You should have come. It was fun, Josian. Meera said, a sad smile on her face. Oh, I know. We'll have plenty of time to get to know everyone and have lots of fun on the way to the wall. Meera, why are we going to the wall? Does father know? No, not yet, but I'll tell him when I see him next. Don't you want to see it? See Winterfell? He said, a note of excitement in his voice for once. Aye, but why are we going, Josian? I have to teach Jon, Meera, teach him how to use his gift. His sister just looked at him before shaking her head. He knew she'd accompany him anywhere, but it still made him sad that she did so out of concern and love more so than out of want. That her own feelings usually got put to one side in order for his, she deserved better than that. And he almost cursed the gods for giving him this burden. Come, I think they're doing some sparring in the yard, Josian said, trying to do something Meera liked for once. You hate sparring, she japed. Aye, but I like watching my sister put silly boys in their place, he said, and got a laugh in return. Very well, let's go, brother. Yaxway! After hearing what Howland said, they had begun to walk back. The small lord was still speaking, but it was all just noise to Jaime as he was trying to come to terms with everything he'd learned. Arthur was alive and would be coming back to Westeros. Coming to see Jon, to see Jaime. What would he think of him? Of what he'd done? Would he still think him a brother? Even though Jon had tried to put a brave face on it, the things they'd learned had affected his king. So on their way back, he told Howland he needed to speak to the boy, and he and Jon went to find somewhere to talk. Why Jon had picked the docks, though, he had no idea, but they walked to the edge of the water and watched as ships were unloaded. The Lion's Roar had been joined in the largest section of the dock by the Manderly flagship, the Western Wolf. They walked over to the ship to take a look at it, and Jon smiled at the White Wolf figurehead. Though a slightly different take on the same idea, due no doubt to different builders, to see it close to their own pinnacle ship was to see two sister ships. Identical but different, like two sides of a coin. They walked past it and came to the outskirts of the Manderly shipbuilders. They could see the frame of another pinnacle ship and one further along in its building. Jon stood looking quietly for a moment before he turned to him. Secrets, my lord, Jon said. What? You were about to ask me what I was thinking of, Jon said with a small smile. How did you know that? Because if you hadn't been then, I would have asked you, my lord, Jon said, and he laughed. How are you feeling, Jon? I'm good, I think. You? Tired, Jaime said, and Jon laughed again. Why do you think they did it, my lord? Why not tell everyone from the start? Why hide it? Your grandfather would never have accepted it, Jon. Robert would never have accepted it, Jaime said, and noticed how Jon cringed at the mention of Robert. I can't understand it, can't get my head around it. Secrets and lies, my life was torn from me because of damn secrets and lies. Jon said, his voice rising as he spoke. No more, you hear me, no more. Jon? What are you saying? I can't do it, Jaime. I can't lie to people I care about, not anymore. I know there are those we can't tell. I know the time isn't right, but Loras, Marguerite, I just can't. Jon said, holding his head in his hands. Look at me, Jon, look at me. Jaime said, and Jon turned to him. You are my king. I follow your wishes. Do you want to tell them? I do. I need to, Jaime. Then I'm ready to face what comes next. You have my support, my king, now and always. For the second time that day, Jaime found himself hugged by his king. This time less angry and emotional than the last. Yet he felt it the same. This was what he was supposed to be. The support his king needed. They stood there for a few moments before Jon looked to him, and they began to walk back. He could see the weight had been removed. When they had finally met back up with Loras and caught back up with Ghost, who had run off as soon as they left the wolf's den, Jon looked to him and he nodded, and they all made their way back to the new castle. He walked in silence next to his squires. He could see Daisy out of the corner of his eye and smiled at her, which Jon caught with a smirk. When they arrived at the keep, he was surprised to see Sir Rallis waiting for him. My lord, my father wishes a word if he may. The last thing he wanted to do after the day he'd had was speak to Lord Wyman. He enjoyed the man's company, but his head was pounding and thoughts of Arthur and the future wouldn't leave his mind. But he nodded and watched as Jon, Loras, and Daisy and her sisters walked to the sparring yard, something he now wished he could go to see. Instead, though, he followed Sir wisely through the corridors before coming to a room where two large men holding tridents stood guard. Lord Manderly's solar was a large room even bigger than his own at Casterly Rock, seated at a table in front of him. The large Lord of White Harbor greeted him with a smile. He nodded and took the offered seat. Within moments, a serving girl arrived carrying a plate of breaded crabs and some wine. He barely ate, but found the wine very welcoming. My lord, I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you. The business we share has contributed greatly to my city, and you and young Jon and your brother Tyrion is it? Aye, my lord. All of you have been great friends to my house and to the north. You're welcome, my lord. We've benefited greatly also. Jaime said, nodding while taking another drink of the wine. I believe after this you're off to the Wall, and then to Winterfell. Is that right? Aye, my lord, it is. May I ask why the Wall? Jon wishes to see his uncle. He felt it would be wrong to come to the north and not visit him, and while we could have tried to have him meet us in Winterfell, maybe his duties wouldn't have allowed the visit. I see. The reason I wish to speak to you, Lord Jaime, is about Winterfell. About the reception you, or more precisely, young Jon may get when you get there. Wyman said. Is this about the fish? Jaime said, and Wyman laughed. It is, my lord. I visited there some time ago. While I was speaking to Lord Stark, Lady Catelyn came in shouting about how Jon was going to steal Winterfell from her son, and how a lad couldn't be trusted. Only she didn't call him lad, did she? Lord Wyman? No, she did not. Werbing sighed. I fear with her attitude and with what happened in King's Landing, she may not welcome Jon how he may expect. And Lord Stark? Jaime asked, raising his eyebrows slightly. May not welcome him as fondly as he may hope. I see. I thank you, my lord. I shall think on this. He's a good lad. He deserves better, Wyman said with a soft smile. He is better, my lord, Jaime said as he got up to leave. But what he deserves is everything. Jon... Arriving at the sparring yard, Jon was surprised to see the small Jon and the two Karstark brothers engaged in a spirited spar. Ghost sat down by his feet as he watched the large Umberlord move swiftly around the Karstarks. When he saw he had an audience, though, he began to show off. Began trying to embarrass the two brothers, something which backfired when Ghost popped his head up to stare at him. Watching as the small Jon took a step backwards, inadvertently leaving an opening and then being caught with a blow from both brothers. Soon had everyone other than the heir to Last Hearth laughing riotously. Damn, Jon, can you keep your wolf away from the sparring yard? The small Jon said, grimacing. No, Ghost, would miss his good friend, wouldn't ye, fella? Go to small Jon, Ghost. Keep him away from me." The small Jane's voice rose far higher than a man's should, causing even more laughter. You're right, Ghost. It is much better staying here with me than going to the scared man." After the small John had calmed and they were joined by Meera and Howland Reed, the two youngest Mormont girls decided to try their luck against the Karstark brothers. Loras stood beside him as they watched, a nervous look on his face. He'd been stupid and should have been more subtle, telling him he wished to speak to him. He turned to his friend and gave him his most reassuring smile before the spar began in earnest, in front of them. Just like their sister, both Mormonts favored the mace. Watching them wield it, Jon was sure that they must be given them as soon as they're born, on Bear Island. The Karstarks were strong but slow. Both of them put far too much into swinging and not enough into moving, and it didn't take long for them to be caught out and defeated. Loras looked to him, but Jon shook his head. His mind wasn't in the right place to spar, and he worried he could lose control. Instead, it was Meera Reed who offered to face Loras, and Jon tried his best to talk his friend out of it, despite her size and the Cran out of it. Despite her size and the Cranonan's lack of standard martial training. The way she moved and picked up a trident should have given Loras pause. Whether it was the crowd or even Loras trying to prove something to the Northerners, Jon couldn't talk him out of it. He could hear the sniggers beside him from Daisy and her sisters at the confused look on Loras's face, at both Meera's stance and choice of weapon. The spar itself was over far too fast, and Jon could almost feel the embarrassment that Loras felt at being defeated, not by a girl his friend had seen enough to know how talented and fierce anyone could be, but in the ease and quickness of the loss. Loras had moved forward, raised his sword and thrust, which Meera had parried. She had then thrust the trident, and Loras set himself to parry, but at the last moment she pulled it back. Twisting it, she used the prong to take Loras' legs from under him, and he soon found himself with the trident at his neck. "I yield," Loras said, before Meera offered her hand, which he was happy to see. Loras took with no issue. "Are you sure you don't wish to try, Jon?" Meera shouted to him. "I was reluctant before, now even more so," Jon said to loud laughs. "Some other time, then?" "Aye, perhaps on the morrow." They watched another couple of spars before Jon asked Loras to come with him. It was time to tell his friend the truth. They walked past the sparring yard and found a quiet corner of the keep where some plants had been laid. He looked to Ghost, who took up a position where anyone coming towards them would be faced with a dire wolf, which hopefully would put them off venturing closer. "Or just what I'm about to tell you. No one can know. Not yet. I need your word on this. You can't speak to anyone about it, not even your family." "Jon, you have it. You don't even have to ask. I'd never betray a confidence, you know that." I do, but this is beyond that. Should this come out, Loras, it could mean my life," Jon said, and watched Loras pale. "What is it, Jon? What's going on?" "Lord Stark is not my father, Loras," Jon said, and heard his friend gasp. "But that can't be. Everyone knows of you. I mean that you're his son." I know. But it's a lie. A lie to protect me. Or at least I think it was," Jon said before shrugging. "My father was Rhaegar Targaryen. My mother Lyanna Stark," Jon said, and felt relieved saying it out loud. "But that can't be. I mean, oh Jon, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," Lord Yax said, clearly disturbed. It took Jon barely a second to realize why. "No, Loras, it wasn't like that. They were in love. They were married." "But he was already married, Jon." "The marriage was annulled. Agyag was happy to do so, I believe, though I'm not certain," Jon said, and wondered why he'd not considered that before. Had he been so wrapped up in his own head that he'd never thought that maybe Adya had been set aside against her will? "So you're the heir to the throne? Wait, you're going for the throne, aren't you?" Loras said, his excitement taking Jon from his thoughts. Aye, Robert. Jon Arryn, they stole the throne from my family. They're the reason my mother, my father, my brother and sister, and their mother are dead. They're running the realm into the ground. I intend to take back my birthright, with fire and blood. I'll stand by you, Jon. You know I will. If you wish. That is. Lord said softly. You're my friend, Loras. I need you with me, Jon said. Loras began to get down to one knee, but Jon stopped him. Please, I want to. One day soon, Loras, let me speak to your family first. To Marguerite first. Don't pledge to me until then. Just be my friend, please. Jon said, looking to Loras. I have been and always shall be your friend. Howland. After the emotions of talking to Jon and Jaime, he had hoped the rest of the day would pass far more easier. Heading back to his room, though he had been called to see Lord Wyman, he wasn't sure what to say to his old friend, how much to reveal. Simply telling him to keep a good relationship with Jon Snow was pointless. Wyman was already doing so. But he couldn't tell him the truth. Should he point him the right direction? Or was he already looking there? The thing with Wyman was just a sniff of something may be enough. He pondered on this as he walked towards the solar. As the guards led him inside, he was glad to see that it was just the two of them inside. It would allow for a much freer conversation. Though without the distractions of someone else speaking, it would be harder to keep Wyman from dictating where the conversation went. He smiled as he took a seat. It had been far too long since he and the Lord of White Harbor had been in the same place. He ignored the obligatory plate of food that Wyman already had in front of him, but gratefully accepted the glass of wine. "How are you, old friend?" Wyman asked. "I'm good, though it seems you are doing better. I saw the ship leave when I arrived, a magnificent thing to behold. I hear you're on your way to having 4 of them." "Aye. The first 2 paid for themselves within a year. Howland at the advantage they give on the seas is incredible. I can't thank the lad enough. I don't even know how to," Wyman said as he looked at him intently. "Does he even want it to be thanked, that is? No, it'd be far easier if he did. The lad's he's not like that. Seems almost to be embarrassed when it's brought up. You know that pup we sent him? He's no longer a pup, Wyman," Howland said as both men laughed. That's true. The beast lives up to his name. All right, he's got half the town terrified and the other half hoping to see such a legendary beast up close. Almost as soon as he appears, he's gone as if he wasn't there at all. The reports I've had from my guards would make you laugh. "Howland," Wyman said, his grin still on his face. "The lad seems to control him well enough." "Aye, that he does. Anyway, what was I saying? Aye, that's it. When I delivered it to the lad, he wanted to pay the men. Wouldn't accept no for an answer. The same, when I sent him the present he ordered for Ser Jorah's wife, that time he even bought the men a barrel of ale." Wyman said, laughing loudly. Howland shook his head. The boy was just the same as his mother. Lyanna, too, wouldn't allow a good deed go unrewarded. To find out her son was taking after her, in this manner, only made him more sure he had been right to bend his knee. "What make you of the lad, Howland?" Wyman asked curiously. "I think the move west has helped him greatly, Wyman. He's not as I'd heard. When he was at Winterfell, he was sullen and withdrawn. No, I met the lad a few years ago, quiet as a mouse he was. Wouldn't raise his voice or speak without being spoken to. Certainly wouldn't jape with the freedom he does now. I don't know what Ned was thinking. Some people aren't mean to caged and told what to do," Howland said wistfully. "Aye," Wyman said, looking at him curiously. "He's not much like his father, is he?" "I don't know. I see him in him when I look at him," Howland said softly. "I had thought he was more like Brandon, but he doesn't have the wildness." "No, it's more a quiet fierceness he has," Howland said and looked to Wyman. The two sat there in silence for a few moments, Wyman looking at him with a strange look on his face before he smiled. He knew he'd perhaps pushed a little far, given away far too much without explicitly saying it. Wyman had definitely picked up on it, but far better the groundwork was set. His old friend could be trusted, but it would be up to the king himself to confirm what he now suspected. "I really wish I'd seen that joust," Wyman said with a booming laugh. "Aye, me too, old friend, me too." They had spoken of other things for the next hour or so, Howland finding his appetite when some crab pies were brought in. The pastry and sauce both cooked just how he liked them. When he eventually left, he felt he and Wyman understood where the other was coming from. Jon would need a friend like Wyman, and he now had one. Howland was sure of it. Ned, on the other hand, though they spoke only briefly of their liege lord, it was clear both were disappointed in him. Howland was sorely tempted to travel to Winterfell to give Ned a piece of his mind. But he was needed home, and he sorely missed Jotya. Truth be told, he disliked leaving Greywater Watch. His duties there took up most of his time, and the peacefulness of the place was something he welcomed. When he arrived at his room, he was surprised to see his daughter waiting for him. While Josian was his heir, it was Meera he loved the most. His son's mercurial nature and connection with the old gods, while making him proud, still disturbed him greatly. Meera's, on the other hand, was more than any father deserved, dutiful, loyal, trustworthy. His daughter was all of these, and yet she was playful, winsome, and quick to stand up for those who she cared about. "Father, we must speak about Josian," Meera said when he reached her. "Is he all right? Has he had another vision?" Howland said, opening the door to his room. They walked inside, and he sat down, while his daughter choosing to stay standing. "Aye, he has, father," he says. "We're to accompany Jon Snow to the wall, that he's to teach him how to warg." "When did he say this?" "Earlier today, father, when I returned from visiting the town." "So be it. If he says we must visit the wall, then we must visit the wall." Howland said, sighing. "No, father," he said. "It's to be just him and I." "What? I'm not letting you two go alone," Howland said fearfully. "We'd be with Lord Jaime and his guards, father, along with Ser Jorah and his men. That's not what bothers me." "Then what it is, my child?" "It's just," he says, "we can visit the wall and on to Winterfell. We can then come back with them and meet up with our men at Moat Cailin, but there's more, father. I'm not sure. But there's something he's not telling me. I'll speak to him. We'll get to the bottom of it, my child." Howland said and hugged his daughter to reassure her. Lorges. To say he'd been stunned when Jon had told him of his parents would be an understatement. His first instinct was that his friend needed him now more than ever. That he needed his support, so Loras had given it unconditionally. Later, as he sat in his room, though the questions came, how could it be true? Why did no one else ever know? Could Jon be mistaken? The last one was the one he focused most on. Jon seemed certain, and his friend was not a liar, so he believed he was telling the truth. But where did the truth come from? What evidence was there for it? Loras wasn't the smartest person in the realm, in their lessons. Jon usually outshone him, but he wasn't stupid either. So he began to piece things together. Laying back on his bed, he began to examine the evidence, to see if he could come up with a reason why his friend could be wrong. He knew his family, his grandmother in particular, had wondered why Jaime took Jon as a squire not only based on his birth, his perceived birth, a voice inside his head said, but given the relationship between the North and the West, or more precisely, the lack of one. When he had fought Jon in the duels, though it had been clear to him, Jon was a far more talented swordsman than even he, so of course Jaime would want him as a squire, though it still didn't explain why Ned Stark allowed it. But if Jon was going for the throne, surely that meant Jaime knew right, which meant that Jaime was helping him, but why? Was it not his sister on the throne? Her son in line to be the next king? It didn't make sense. But then, as he thought more on it, he remembered the note from the Queen and Yemi's reaction to it, how he had burned it in front of him. Did Yemi not like his sister? Was there more to it than that? Loras sighed as he tried to figure it out. This was so not his area of expertise. Rolling over on the bed, he closed his eyes. He pictured his friend on the throne. Ghost resting beside him, he pictured himself standing over his shoulder, a white cloak glistening on his back. His sword shined and polished and easily ready to be drawn. As he drifted off to sleep, he had found no answers to his questions, but he knew one thing. If it was true, then Jon would make a great king. The knock on the door the next morning woke him, and he sleepily staggered to open the door to find both Jon and Lord Jaime there, his friend carrying his other chest in his arms. Allowing them inside, he quickly closed the door. He thanked the seven he'd fallen asleep in his clothing, the thoughts of answering the door to Jaime not properly dressed, not ones he liked. As Jon and Jaime sat down, he sat back on the bed and waited for them to speak. "Jon told me about yesterday," Jaime said. "My lord, I wouldn't say anything. You must believe me," Loras said nervously. I know that, Loras, but when Jon told you, he may have left you with more questions than answers. Is that not right, Jon?" It is, my lord. It never occurred to me. I just wanted to tell you," Jon said, looking at him and smiling. "I understand, and I'm glad you did, Jon," Loras said, returning his friend's smile. He watched as Jon reached into the chest and took out some letters. Some he placed to one side, but two he held and handed to Jaime, who opened them and handed them to him. Looking at the letters, he almost gasped out loud. The first was a notice of annulment between Iaya and Rhaegar, the second a marriage notice. Looking at the names who witnessed it, Loras couldn't help the excitement he felt. Sarasarai's Wendiad and Sarasarai's Saradane. His fingers involuntarily traced the sword of the morning's name. He handed the letters back to Jaime almost reverently before Jon passed Jaime the other letter. This one a simple birth announcement signed by all three of the knights, the King's Guard, Jon's King's Guard. No, not Jon. "Jaxiliris," Loras said softly. "Aye, the name my mother gave me. My true name," Jon said, smiling. Loras carefully folded the notice and handed it back to Jaime before Jon motioned him towards him, walking over. He felt the trepidation in every step. When he got to him, Jon reached in the chest, and what he pulled out did make him gasp. An egg. Jon had a dragon egg. "That?" "Aye, it is," Jon said, holding the egg in his hands. A pained expression on his face, as he quickly placed the white egg back in the box, its blue flecks reflecting in the light. He hit worriedly on as Jon sat down. His friend was holding his head in hands, his breathing shallow. He looked far paler than he had just a moment before, reaching his hand out. Loras touched his shoulder, and Jon shuddered. Jon, are you all right? He asked. Jon, he said a bit louder. Jaime turned as Jon fell to the floor, his breathing quick and sharp. Lors moved quickly to the door to call for help, but Jaime called him back as Jon was sitting up now, his color returning to his face. Jon, what is it? What's wrong? Jaime asked, his concern clear. It's nothing, my lord, it's the egg. I don't know. It seems to be pushing me away. Pushing you away? Jaime asked, confused. I can't explain it. It seems upset with me. I don't understand. I need to speak to my uncle. Lozio was dumbfounded. What did he mean, push him away? Why was Jon speaking of the egg as if it was alive? The more answers he got, the more questions it seemed to raise. But he knew one thing for certain now. Something he had known in his heart when Jon had told him his friend was telling the truth. Jon was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, the rightful king of Westeros, and Loras would stand with him for as long as he wanted him to. Jon was his friend, his king, now and always. Leness? As she dressed for the farewell feast, Leness couldn't help but feel her stomach. Though she wasn't really showing yet, she believed she could feel it, thought there was a small difference there, and as her hand brushed her stomach, she smiled. She wanted so badly to find out if she was right, but she worried that Jorah would make them return home, that he would be overprotective, which, given his history, she wouldn't blame him for being. He had lost his first wife in the birthing bed. 3 times she had fallen pregnant, and never did she deliver, the third taking her life along with her child's. Had she met Jorah's father, had his duties allowed him to attend the wedding, then she would accede to the request she knew her husband would make should he find out. But she had never met Jorah, and this news only added to her wanting to do so. As she dressed, she heard her bear come into the room, his footsteps heavy and playful as he attempted to sneak up on her. Stealth is not your forte, my love, she said, smiling as he grabbed her in his arms. Aye, that's true. Bears are not built for sneaking, he said, capturing her lips with his own. As always, the kisses grew more passionate, and while she would much prefer to follow them to their logical conclusion, it was then they heard the knock on the door. She giggled at the put-off face her bear made. She imagined a bear in the woods having his meal disturbed. Would look the exact same way. Go away, Jorah shouted, though she could see he was playing up his annoyance. Come on, you two. There's plenty of time for a whatever, later. Lyra's voice said, and Leness couldn't help but laugh. Besides, the White Wolf is eager to eat, aren't you, boy? Jorah said, surprising her. Come to think of it, I meant to speak to you on that, Jorah said. On what, my love? Leness said as he helped tie her dress at the neck. Jon's wolf! It's outside our door. You know why? No, I don't, though it does seem a law unto itself at times. Maybe I'll speak to Jon later, Leness said. It had been strange when meeting up with Jon and Jaime yesterday. The wolf seemed to show an excessive amount of interest in her. It had taken Jon to basically order the wolf to go with them for it to reluctantly leave her side. When the boys had come back, the wolf had stayed with Jon when he went to his room. But when she left to go to her own, there he was walking beside her. Yes, she would speak to Jon when they got a chance. Besides, she already had another reason to speak to the lad. After finishing dressing, she and Jorah walked outside to find Daisy along with her sisters, each of them taking turns to pet the white wolf who lay across the hall from her door. She wondered if perhaps the wolf knew animals were protective of those carrying their offspring. Perhaps Ghost could sense it in her. It made her smile just a little to think the wolf was being protective of her. To have a mythical animal look after you and your babe was not something most could claim. She looked to Daisy, who looked especially beautiful tonight. Her long dark hair was loose and showed off her neck and shoulders to their fullest. Her height allowed her to carry off most dresses elegantly, and this was one of her very best. Its silken folds were magnificent, and its blue really showed off her eyes. The cut was exquisite too, showing the barest hints of cleavage when she moved forward. Trying to impress someone? Lennier said softly while Daisy glowered at her. No, it was the only clean dress I had left, Daisy said, and both her sisters giggled. Of course it was. And she didn't spend almost an hour messing with her hair either. Lyra said and ducked out of the way of the hand that shot at her. Well, you do look beautiful, cousin, Jorah said, and Lennier smiled approvingly at her bear. They made their way to the feasting hall. Glad tonight was not as elaborate as those before it. There would be the usual numerous courses and dancing, of course, but no introductions or formality. Instead, you would just be directed to your seats, and the feast would begin when Lord Manderly deigned it so. On entering the hall, they were relieved to see it almost full. Jaime sat beside Wyman, and at the smaller table to the left sat Jon with her nephew and the rest of the younger children. Lyra and Jory moved to go sit with the small Jon and the Karstarks. while they were directed to the seats beside Jaime. "My ladies, you both look amazing this evening," Jaime said, standing and kissing both their hands. Leness noticed his look lingering on Daisy. "I thank you, Lord Yaxley," Leness said as she sat down. Ghost had gone to lay beside Jon, but she noticed he looked to her more than once. She smiled at the wolf, who she could have sworn gave her a nod, though perhaps it was just the light in the hall. The conversation flowed, and when the dancing finally started, she took to the floor with her bear, though much to her annoyance, Jaime stayed sitting and she could see the disappointment on Daisy's face. After the first dance, she made her way to the table where Jon was sitting, saying hello to her nephew and laughing when Ghost licked her hand. "But Jon, I don't believe I've had the pleasure of a dance from you, which doesn't seem fair, given you've danced with all these lovely young ladies now, does it?" Leness said, smiling. "Not tonight he hasn't," she heard a murmur from one of Lord Manderly's granddaughters. "I'm sorry, my lady. I've my leg, you see," Jon said, and she could see he was lying. "Then perhaps you'd accompany me back to my table, then." I would be honored, my lady," Jon said, standing up and taking her offered arm. They walked not to the table, but to the other side of the room. She wanted Jon to be able to see Jaime as he looked at Daisy, give the boy the full picture before she put her plan in place. But she decided first to speak about the wolf, maybe gain some insight into knowing for certain if she was right about why he was drawn to her. "Ghost is very protective, is he not?" "Eh, my lady, back home with Joy, you should see him," Jon said with a fond smile. "Just with Joy?" "No, my lady, he's the same with Lady Margaery also. You and my niece get along well, don't you?" "We do, my lady. She and Loras are my best friends." She couldn't help the smile which came to her face then. Best friends, oh, you poor clueless little boy, to be so young and so innocent. She had seen him with Loras and seen him with Margaery. Only one would she describe as a friend. Her sister could do no better than to make a match with her niece and Jon, though with Olenna pulling the strings, she was doubtful one would ever be forthcoming. "Has Ghost been bothering you, my lady?" "What, oh no, not at all, Jon. Your wolf has been on his best behavior." "Good," Jon said, before he noticed Jaime looking at Daisy and smiled broadly. "They would look good together, don't you think?" Leness said. I do, my lady. I wonder why he hasn't asked her to dance yet." "I don't know, my lady," Jon said, his brow rising. "Does Lord Jaime have a lady back in the Westerlands, Jon?" "No, my lady, he doesn't," Jon said, now staring directly at Daisy and Jaime. "It's strange, don't you think? I mean, they like each other. Anyone can see that. I wonder what's stopping Lord Yancey from asking her." Leness just said, "What happened next was very strange. The look on Jon's face was hard to identify. Was it worry? No, that wasn't it. It was more. She looked carefully, and for a second she thought it may be regret, but all of a sudden it was gone, and he turned to her smiling. "I think I should accompany you to your table, my lady." "Of course I thank you, Jon." They walked to the table in silence, and when they got there, Jon said hello to Lord Wyman and to her bear before he complimented Daisy, which brought a smile to her face. He then looked at Jaime and said nothing, though it seemed he motioned to him, but she couldn't be sure. As she took her seat, she watched as Jon left the room. The White Wolf once again looking to her table. After just a few moments, Jaime got up and excused himself. She watched as he walked off in the same direction as Jon had, Daisy looking forlornly after him. She turned to her friend and gave her a smile. Things would be changing for the better. For her soon, she felt. Jon. When he had come back from speaking to Loras, Jon had gone to tell Jaime how he had reacted. He had been surprised that along the way Ghost had ran off, but thought nothing of it, and instead continued to Jaime's room. The Lord's guest rooms were impressive, but compared to the family wing they seemed a downgrade, which gave Jon pause. He'd been given better rooms than his lord, which was strange. After speaking to Jaime, he had been stunned when Jaime had brought up that, despite Loras's acceptance, Jon hadn't actually given him any proof, something they rectified quickly. Though when he'd held the egg, it started. The egg was forcing him from it. It was displeased with him about something, but it had not dismissed him completely. He couldn't understand it, nor the images he'd been shown. Images of fire, images of ice, fire and ice, over and over again. He saw ice melt, saw it turn into water and drip against the ground. He saw the flames rise higher and higher, but he couldn't make sense of it. He knew he'd passed out for a moment, though it had felt a lot longer. All the time he'd been continuously bombarded with the images, he had heard the words over and over in his head, fire and ice and fire. After reassuring Jaime and Loras and putting the egg away, he'd headed back to his room for a rest. drifting off into a thankfully dreamless sleep before he was woken by Loras knocking at the door. After hurriedly dressing and making his way to the farewell feast, he had been called to speak to Lord Reed, meeting him and his children before they went inside. "Jon, please, I must speak with you." "Of course, my lord." "You know my children, Meera and Josian?" "I do, my lord," he said, nodding to them both. The look Josian given him a lot more friendly than his usual ones. "I know after tonight you'll be heading to the wall, Jon, to speak with your family." Howland said, and Jon was thankful he didn't elaborate. "Aye, that I will, my lord." "I would beg a favor of you, Jon." "Name it, my lord. If it's in my power to do so, then I shall without hesitation." "I would ask you to allow my children to accompany you to the wall and to Winterfell, and then on to Moat Cailin on your return." "Of course, my lord. I'd be happy to have them with me, but may I ask why?" "I wish to help you with Ghost," Josian said softly. "Ghost? I know you sometimes see with his eyes." "They're just dreams," he said, though not assuredly. "Are they the only dreams you have?" Josian asked, and his look was curious now. "I know, I have others," Jon said softly, and was surprised to see a full smile on Josian's face, something which seemed to have caught both his sister and father with equal surprise. "We have much to talk about, Jon. I can help, truly," Josian said, and Jon nodded. "Very well, I'll look forward to your company, my lord. I'll speak to Lord Jaime, but it should be fine," Jon said, and Howland smiled, knowing it would be. When they had entered the hall later on, Jon immediately found himself in the company of Lady Winifred and Lady Wella, both girls disappointed when he told them he'd hurt his leg earlier. He almost had to elbow Loras in the ribs at the faces his friend was making and couldn't even look at Meera, who sat there with a large grin on hers. He was thankful when Lady Leness came over to speak to him, though the conversation that followed was a strange one. It was only when she brought up Jaime and Lady Daisy that he began to see it, the little looks, the way he'd lean in when she spoke, or tense when she spoke to someone else. He too would feel that way with Margaery, though he knew that, for adults, it was different. He and Margaery were friends, that was all, but as Leness asked him about Jaime having a lady back home or for a reason why he would not dance with Daisy, it hit him. He knew the reason. He was the reason. Jaime was a Kingsguard, though not to him. To him he was far more. He was his mentor, his teacher, his friend, his confidant. No, you wouldn't say it, wouldn't think it. His father? Jon shook his head. No, his father was dead, but had he lived, if he was anything like Jaime, then Jon would have been happy. Shouldn't his father be happy too? He had nodded to Jaime to meet him outside, when Leness had taken her seat, and now a few moments later he stood in the hall, waiting for him. When Jaime arrived, he motioned for him to follow. "Jon, what's this about?" "We need to talk, Jaime, but not here." They walked outside the keep and down the stairs, Jon looking for a quiet place away from the guards. When he saw it, he looked around, annoyed to see Ghost hadn't come with them. Though almost as if he willed the wolf to be there, he arrived, his white fur clear from a large distance away. The wolf came, and Jon nodded for him to stand guard. "Jon," Jaime asked, his voice showing his annoyance. "I wish to speak to you." "Of Lady Daisy, Jaime." "What about her?" Jaime asked defensively. "You like her, don't you?" It doesn't matter." "Why doesn't it?" "You know why," Jaime said, huffing a breath. "Jaime, look at me. It matters all right. It matters to me. Jon, I'm a Kingsguard. We swore an oath. Take no wife, father, no children. That's all part of the oath." "That's a stupid oath," Jon said, and Jaime looked at him, shock clear on his face. "Really it is. Those oaths you swore, they confine you. They stopped you doing what was right, did they not?" But still, Jon, I can't. Arthur's coming back. He'll already hate me for the king, for Elia, and the children. I can't." "Who cares what Arthur thinks?" Jon said angrily. "You mean more to me than anyone else, including Arthur Dayne. Don't you know that by now?" I do, but what would you have me do? I can't dishonor her and I can't marry her. So what am I supposed to do?" Jaime said in frustration. "You're supposed to be happy, Jaime. Anything less, and your king won't be pleased," he said with a smile. "What would you have me do?" Jaime said softly. "I'd have you do what makes you happy, Jaime. That's it. Do you think you'd be happy with her?" I do," Jaime said with a smile. "Then speak to her. Find out if you want the same thing. I think she does." Jon, if I do this, I can't lie to her." "Then don't. You think after the last few days I'd ask you to lie? Speak to her, Jaime. Find out what it is you both want. Then whatever you decide to do from there, you have my support. I trust you." Yaxley nodded and looked at him. He actually looked happier already. They turned to walk back into the hall, and Jon felt he had done something right here. Something good, considering all Jaime had done for him. It was a start, if nothing else. Daisy. This night was turning into a disaster. She had spent all this time getting ready, trying to look good, and then he just walked away from her. Just left her sitting there like a fool. She had come to realize that she was wasting her time with him. Despite the smiles and the looks, despite the compliments, nothing had happened. It was as if he was just being polite. Just going through the motions. She looked down to see her sisters dancing with the Karstarks and sighed. Beside her, Leness had tried to be comforting. She knew, but it was annoying her that her friend knew what she was going through. That her rejection in some way was public. Her mother would be ashamed of her. She knew that, not because she'd been rejected, but because she was a she-bear, and she should be fierce. But it was hard to be like that when, for the first time in her life, she felt as if she wasn't good enough for someone, that the reason he didn't want to be with her was simply... She sighed as she saw him walk back into the hall with Jon Snow, the boy moving towards his own table. As Jaime walked to hers, he smiled at her, but didn't take a seat, instead looking her straight in the eye. "My lady, I would be honored if you'd grace me with the next dance," he said, his smile full. She looked at him, her eyes taking him in, the way he looked at her, making her heart race. She smiled and held out her hand, which he took, leading her to the floor. He held her close, and they began to dance. The music almost unheard in the background as he looked at her. She smiled and he smiled back, before he spun her quickly to one side, making her laugh. "I apologize, my lady, for not doing this sooner." "It's quite all right, my lord." "Jaime," he said with a smile. "Jaime," she replied softly. "I'm Daisy, pleased to meet you." "Jaime," she said, getting a laugh in return. "You look very beautiful tonight, Daisy." "As opposed to every other night, Jaime," she said, smirking while raising an eyebrow, which made him laugh, yet again. "No, I've yet to see you not looking beautiful," he said, and she felt her breath catch. "Even in my armor," she said with a giggle. Even in your armor." The music stopped, and it took a long moment for it to restart, making her think that this was all. They'd only have one dance tonight, only to hear Jaime laugh loudly as it started up again. She looked at him questioningly, only for him to turn her to the musicians, and for her to see Jon walking away from them, placing his purse back on his breeches. "It seems your squire wishes for us to dance more," she said. "Aye, that it does." They danced 3 more times before he led her back to the table. He sat down beside her and poured her some wine, which she drank eagerly, though she far preferred ale to get drunk with. She liked wine when she meant to keep her head, something that tonight she wished to do. She ignored Leness's smirk from beside her as she and Jaime began to talk. The night seemed to end so very soon, and she was delighted when he escorted her back to her room. She wondered if she should invite him in. Was it too soon? Would he think less of her? But it was Jaime who decided the course of the night. "Daisy, I'd like to get to know you more, if you wish, that is," he said almost nervously. "I'd like that a lot, Jaime." He leaned forward, and for a moment she thought he'd kiss her cheek. But he looked her in the eye, and his hands held her head. His lips glanced against hers, and then he kissed her fuller firmly. She felt his tongue seek entrance to her mouth, and allowed it. They stood there as his hands moved to her back, hers wrapped around his neck, and she could not tell how long it lasted, how long the kisses went on for. All she knew was that, when it stopped, she felt a sense of loss. Something she was happy to see he was feeling too. "I shall see you on the morrow, then," Jaime said, his breath shaky. On the morrow," she said with a smile. She watched him walk away and entered her room, feeling happier than she had in a long time. Undressing, she got into the bed and closed her eyes to fall asleep, finding it hard to do so. Her mind raced with thoughts, with how his lips felt against hers, with how his smile brightened her day, but mainly she thought of tomorrow. Jon. Waking up, Jon was happy this was his last day in White Harbor. He had enjoyed his time here, and Lord Wyman and his family had treated him far better than he had ever expected them to. But he was eager to make the journey to the Wall, eager to see his uncles and tell them the truth. He had not seen his Uncle Benjen in over 5 years, half a lifetime ago. They had exchanged some letters over the years which kept them in touch. But given his uncle was a ranger who often traveled beyond the Wall, sometimes the letters were a lot more sparse than at others. At least he wrote to him, though. His other uncle sent a brief letter for his name, day along with coin he had no need of. While he appreciated the thought, he always found the letters to be a disappointment. brief and brisk and to the point and with no feeling in them whatsoever compared to Benjen's. They were terse. The rest of his family weren't much better, though, except for Sansa. His brother barely wrote, and it too had turned into a brief letter on his name day, which wished him well, but that was it. His other two siblings were far too young. Arya would not remember him, he knew that, and it made him sad, while Branny had not met yet. So it was left to Sansa to be the one who kept in touch the most. The letters she sent always made him smile. How much she appreciated his in return. How she thanked him for his gifts and asked how he was. He couldn't help but smile when he looked at his chest as he packed it. His presents this time were numerous for her. He knew Loras and the others teased him for spending his coin so. For the amount of gifts he bought, but he cared not. He had no need of the coin he earned or was gifted. His uncle sent him an allowance, and Jaime was generous to a fault. He had won coin in a tourney or by betting, and still he had been unable to spend it all. Luckily, with the tourney win in King's Landing, he and Margaery had found a much better use for it. Thinking of Margaery, he almost slapped his head. He'd forgotten. With all that had occurred here, he'd forgotten. Picking up the letter, he immediately left his room. His chest was packed and ready to go, and once they broke their fast, it would be time to leave. But first he needed to send a letter to Highgarden. The full, more in-depth letter he'd send back with a lion's roar, but this one was a smaller one which could be carried by Raven. As he left the room, though, he had no wish to go speak to the maester again, even if he would be friendlier this time, knowing he was Jaime's squire. "Do you know where Sir Wylis or Sir Wendell are?" he said, turning to one of the serving girls he met on his way to the hall. "A milord, Sir Wylis is breaking his fast with the others. Sir Wendell is in the library." "Where's that?" Jon asked. "It's just down the corridor, milord. Before you come to the hall, it's the large double door." "Thank you, Meera, milord." "Thank you, Mara," Jon said with a nod. He found the library easily enough and was surprised by how large it was. Winterfell had a pretty extensive library, and Casterly Rock's, under Tyrion's guidance, was almost as large. But Jon knew that Northerners, while keeping the knowledge they had and having maesters who managed libraries, didn't particularly care to spend on such frivolities as they viewed them. The Manderlys, though, had no such issue, and he was sorry now they had not found this out before he left. Tyrion's enthusiasm for reading something he had acquired also. "Sir Wendell," he said, seeing the man placing a book back on the shelf. Jon. "Sorry I didn't see you there. How fares you this morn?" "I'm good, sir. We shall be departing later. I came to bid you farewell and to ask a favor." "I will miss you here, lad. It was good to have you visit. Now, what favor would you have me do?" Sir Rhaegar Wendell said, a large grin on his face. "I was hoping you could send a raven for me, sir." "Of course, lad. To your father, is it?" "No, sir. It's to Highgarden, to a friend." "Of course, lad. I'll see it done. Now go break your fast before there's nothing left for you to eat." Wendell japed, as Jon handed him the letter. "I thank you, sir. You and your family for the welcome and for making me feel at home. It means a lot to me, sir." Jon said, his sincerity clear in his tone. "Don't mention it, lad. We were more than happy to have you here," Wendell said, and patted him on his shoulder. Jon nodded to the knight and left the library happy that his letter to Margaery would be delivered. He made his way to the hall to break his fast, seeing Loras sitting with the Reeds while Howland was talking to Wyman and Wylis. He walked in and was surprised to see Ghost sitting down beside Lady Leness, the woman giggling as she fed the hungry wolf sausages. He shook his head. How the wolf did it, he had no idea, but the damn Dan had a way with the ladies, that was for sure. Ghost looked up at him with an almost smug grin on his face as he was fed yet another sausage. "Ah, young Jon, come sit," Wyman said when he saw him. "Thank you, my lord," Jon said, grabbing a plate and taking a seat beside the two northern lords and the heir to White Harbor. "So off to the wall today, then." "Is it, Jon?" Wylis said. "You're not thinking of taking the black on us, are you, Jon?" he added while shaking his head, making it clear he was jesting. "No, my lord. The watch is honorable and a much-needed thing, but it's not in my future," Jon said determinedly, and noticing Howland's face crease before he smiled at him. "Aye, that it is, Jon. But I sense far bigger things in store for you, my lad," Wyman said as he looked at him. "I thank you, my lord. I only hope to do my family proud." "You already do, lad," Wyman said, smiling. As they continued eating, Jon joined in on the conversation much more freely when he began speaking to them of ice, though was when things got really interesting. "I'm sorry, lad. I don't follow. How could ice be something we could make profit on?" Wyman asked. I'm still working it out, my lord, but we can use it for a lot of things. If fire has many uses, which we know it does, then surely its sister ice can have the same benefits. Jon said, and Wyman looked at him curiously. I have to agree with my father, Jon. I just don't see it, Wylis said. My lord, can you bring me some ice? Jon asked. Aye, how much would you like? Wyman asked to loud laughs from Wylis and Howland. How about this much? Jon said, holding his hand out about a foot. Very well, lad. Lawrence, I want you to go and grab me a chunk of ice, about a foot or so. Lawrence said to a tall servant. At once, my lord. While they waited, Jaime and Daisy arrived separately, though Jon was happy to see both smile at each other when they grabbed their meal to break their fast. Daisy sat beside Leness and her sisters, while Jaime made to do likewise. Lord Jaime, can you join us for this? Young Jon, here's about to show us how to make coin from ice. Wyman said, a large grin on his face, though it was not a malicious one. Of course, my lord. Jane said and took a seat beside them. Jon grimaced as now not only was everyone at the high table looking at him in expectation, but also Loras and the Reeds and Lord Manderly's granddaughters who had since arrived were watching on intently. It took another few moments during which japes were made, when Jon got up and grabbed a jug of milk before Loras returned. Here you are, me lord, Lawrence said, placing a large clear chunk of ice over a foot long and half as wide on the table. May I have a dagger, please? Jon said, and Howland handed him a bone-handled knife. He began chipping away at the ice, ignoring the smallest chips he picked up, a few which were bigger than an eye. Ghost decided then to come over, and Jon threw one in the air which the wolf caught before he crunched it in his mouth to much laughter. When he had a fair few of the eye-sized chunks, Jon placed a few in some mugs before pouring in milk over them. Waiting for a moment, he then took a drink from one of them. My lords, if you will, he said, handing both Jaime and Wyman a mug each. The two lords took a cautious sip of the milk before they took a larger one, the looks on their faces one of surprise. Each took a larger swallow, the next time, and Wyman smiled while looking at him before turning to one of his serving girls. Kala, a jug of ale, please. At once, my lord, the girl said, rushing to grab him his ale. It's good then, father, Wylis said, looking at him. Wait until the ale comes, Wylis, Wyman said with a smirk. Jaime looked at him before turning to Daisy and bringing her the mug. Jon watched as she took a sip and saw the smile on her face. He motioned to Loras to do the same. Pretty soon everyone had tried some milk with ice. It didn't take too long for Paula to return. After handing Wyman the jug of ale, he handed it to Wylis to take a swallow without the ice. Which he did. Wyman then picked up the ice chunks and dropped some in. Waiting a moment, he took a swallow, and his expression was the same one Jon had seen when he tasted his favorite dishes. Here, try this, he said, handing it to Wylis, who too made the same facial expression. Howland, you need to try it, Wylis said. Pretty soon, more ale was brought and more ice chunks added. The best reaction of all, though, had to be the small Jans when he arrived to break his fast. When he saw people were already drinking ale, he immediately joined in. Hunger quickly forgotten. When he tasted the ale with the ice in it, he was exuberant in its praises. Where have you been all me life? He said, looking at the mug before swallowing. It was on the second mug it happened. Had it not been for the small Jan, they'd have probably never have discovered it. But apparently drinking something that cold, that quickly, led to an enormous headache. My head, it feels like it's about to explode. The small Jon lamented loudly. So wrapped up with the pain in his head was he that even when Ghost went over to lick his hand, he didn't react. A few moments later, when the pain had cleared, though he was back drinking again. Slower this time, his lesson learned, it would seem. That's just one of the things we can do, my lord. Once we've figured how to transport it, then places like the Reach would purchase it from us. I've no doubt, Jon said, and Wyman laughed loudly before speaking. Aye, just for their drinks alone, Jon, but what other uses can you see for it? I don't know yet, my lord, but I'm sure I'll find some, Jon said. I've no doubt of it, Wyman said, nodding to him. Yargme, too, gave him a nod when they went back to breaking their fast. Once finished, he went to his room and helped move his chest to the cart before heading back to the stables to saddle Winter in honor. Leading the horses to the courtyard, he found Lord Wyman there with his family to wave them off, so he walked over to bid them his farewells. I thank you, my lord, for the welcome I received. I shall not forget your kindness, Jon said with a small bow. Think nothing of it, lad. It was a pleasure to have you here. I hope you'll visit again. Undoubtedly, my lord, Jon said before moving to say goodbye to the rest of Lord Wyman's family. Once he'd done so, he walked to Lord Reed, who was saying goodbye to his children. Josian and Meera both given their father large hugs. Lord Reed, I thank you for everything. You've been a great help to me, my lord always, and I'm most thankful for your counsel. It's my pleasure, Jon. I look forward to seeing you again soon. I do too, my lord. Once everyone was ready, Jon walked back to Winter. His mare was a little more downbeat than usual, so he leaned in and closed his eyes, feeling the horse loosen up and become more lively. Jon had begun to think of the ride they would go on, the fact that the boat journey would be shorter and from then on it would be riding all the way. Winter practically nodded her head at him when he opened his eyes, and he turned to see Josian look at him with a smile. With that he mounted, and he waved to Lord Wyman and his family as they set off, the large lord looking at him with intrigue. Wyman, breaking his fast that morning, the last thing he had expected was to find another source of income. But the idea that coin could be made from ice was too large an opportunity to pass up, despite his disbelief at such a thing. When he'd tasted the milk, though, and especially the ale, he could see the potential benefits, both here in Westeros and especially in Essos. Dorne would be a huge market simply for the potential of being able to cool things down, but they were not fully ready for such a thing yet. While drinks being cooled would be useful, they needed something more, some other use. There was also the problem of transporting the ice itself, something his maester had no idea about. The man had not even thought that there would be a use for ice in drinking until he had brought it up. Though, to be fair, neither had Wyden until Jon had done so. Every time he thought he knew what the boy was capable of, he ended up being surprised. Had he been in any doubt that it was Jon that came up with the ideas which had made him richer, then just seeing him this morning would have ended that. But this one could be even more lucrative, since they were the only kingdom with ice to spare. They also had the transport routes already in place. Should the lad come up with the ideas to transport it and find other uses, the benefits could be huge. As he sat eating his lamprey pie, he thought more on the boy, and Howland had skirted around the edges of things when they spoke. He thought of the boy's looks, but mainly he thought of the farewell and the strange feeling that had come over him when he saw the lad with his horse. "What's Jon doing?" Wynafred said, making him look to the lad. "I don't know, my love, father," Wylis asked. But Wyman had been far too busy looking at the lad to answer at the time, watching as he and the horse were almost becoming one as the horse's mood changed from sullen and withdrawn to almost giddy. He had smiled looking at it. As the lad had jumped onto the mare, he had almost pictured her there. The fierce girl he'd known from years ago. As he took another piece of the pie, he almost choked, coughing and spluttering as the realization hit him. "Are you all right, father? Are you all right?" Wendell said worriedly from beside him. "Water," he coughed. "Here you go, father," Wendell said, and he greedily drank the water down, clearing the pastry from his throat. I'm fine, Wendell. Just went down wrong," Wyman said, shaking his head to clear his mind. Could it be? Was he imagining it? He began to ponder it in his mind, draining the water he asked for another, and this one he sipped as he thought back on those many years before, of a she-wolf who could not be tamed, and a stag who couldn't accept it. He cursed that Howland had left already. The man would be a fair distance away by now. Should he send men after him? Was he losing his mind? Or was Jon Snow not the son of a wolf at all, but a dragon hiding in wolf's clothing?